Okay, good afternoon, councillors, officers. Welcome to this first session of the Economy and Development Select Committee post-recess. I hope you all had a very good and restful summer. We've got a huge amount to get through this afternoon, so I would appreciate succinctness, brevity when it comes to observations and questions, and obviously be mindful about who you're asking those questions to. I'd like to welcome Councillor Bob Greenland, who's the Cabinet Member for Innovation, Enterprise and Leisure. Bob will be fielding questions on policy and strategy in terms of the corporate plan. So please make sure you direct those questions to Bob, anything technical or operational on anything other items in the agenda. And obviously officers are here to deal with those. So before we go into the agenda, if we can just do a round of introductions, because there's quite a few of us here. Obviously members of the committee, those who are not members, members of planning who are here for the planning items, you're very welcome. So I'm Councillor Paul Pavian and I'm chair of this committee.
Matthew Gatehouse, Head of Policy and Governance, here today in a scrutiny capacity.
Good afternoon, Francis O'Brien, Chief Officer Enterprise.
Mark Hand, Head of Placemaking, Housing, Highways and Floods. Sorry, new job title.
Good afternoon, Richard Jones, Performance Manager.
Hello, Emma Davis, Performance Officer.
Councillor Powell, Member of the Planning Committee.
Kath Fallon, Head of Enterprise Community Animation.
Debbie Blakeborough, Member of the Economy and Development Committee.
David Dovey, Member of this committee and the Planning Committee.
Richard Roden, Councillor for Dixton with Osbaston in Monmouth and Member of this committee.
Councillor Louise Brown, Member of the Planning Committee. Thank you.
Craig O'Connor, Development Management Area Manager.
Philip Thomas, Development Services Manager.
Rachel Lewis, Planning Policy Manager.
Dave Loader, Central Finance.
Mark Howcroft, Assistant Head of Finance.
Okay, thank you very much for the introductions. If we go to agenda item number 1 then, apologies for absence. Do you have any apologies, Matt?
Yes, Councillor
Councillor Fegans and Councillor Davis. We accept those apologies. Item number 2 then, declarations of interest. Any declarations at this stage? No?
As and when, Chair.
Okay, yeah. Thank you very much. Item number 3, public open forum. We do have a member of the public, Mr. Andrew Johnson, who's come to speak to us to use his 10 minutes this afternoon, and he's going to speak on the issue of the Raglan Community Hub. So if I can ask Mr. Johnson to come forward. You have to use a lectern there on the end, is that okay? Yeah.
Thank you, Chair, Councillors and Executive for allowing me to speak. My name is Andrew Johnson and I'm a resident of some 26 years in Raglan. I would like to speak to you about a serious injustice that is being perpetrated right now by Monmouthshire County Council's executive in Raglan around the village's active project to provide fit-for-purpose community facilities in the village. It is an injustice that is made all the worse by the executive ignoring its own remit, ignoring its own standards and procedures on how it should work, as well as the fact that over £35,000 and thousands of man-hours of work by the community are being thrown away by the executive's actions. This when the provision of these facilities will not cause the council a single penny of additional costs, delivers on many of the council's core objectives, and during its progress has saved the council money. Of course, this conversation could equally be had in many of the council's select committee, i.e. adult and children, where many of the benefits will arise, and sustainable communities, as this project represents a clear example of what that committee seeks to promote and achieve. However, I am speaking to this committee specifically because it is the work and actions of this committee that will have the greatest bearing on the successful delivery of the project. It is also extremely pertinent to be talking to you today, given the reports that you are considering that demonstrate a clear lack of cumulative progress in delivering the 2011 to 2021 local development plan and the 2.4 million deficit the council finds itself in. I would like to give you some background, a short timeline of events, the current situation, and a structured proposal of what I would like and hope this committee will do to help resolve this matter. In 2014, MCC's Education Department were developing plans for the new school and refused to engage with the community in any meaningful way about the future of community facilities in the village. I wrote a letter of complaint to Paul Matthews, highlighting all the ways that the council had failed to follow its own ways of working and its commitments to the public. He immediately recognised the shortfall, and through Kelly Byrne, we jointly convened the Raglan Strategy Group, a working group joint chaired by Kelly and the Raglan Village Hall Association, together with representatives of Raglan Community Council and our county councillor, Councillor Penny Jones. One of the key commitments by all members of the group was to ensure that no one was blindsided by the actions of another, and the group would usher in a new model of cohesive community framework between the council and the community. The RVHA committed to run a project to deliver fit-for-purpose community facilities in the village. In 2014, it ran an extensive consultation with the village about the outlined needs, not wants, but needs of the village, and thus the shape of any future community facilities. This consultation was recognised by the council as being of a very high standard, both in terms of the response levels achieved and in the quality of the outcomes. In 2015, it wrote a clear business plan based on the outcome of the consultation with costs and benefits and submitted it to council. In full council, it was agreed that trying to combine community facilities with educational facilities really didn't work. And the council agreed to the community asset transfer of the old junior school site to the RVHA. The cap was agreed for a 2-year period, and the ongoing renewal would be subject to the RVHA making continual progress towards the delivery of the project. Part of the financing of the project was £150,000 of Section 106 money deriving from the building of 45 houses on council land on Chepstow Road. Another key part of the funding was a £500,000 grant from Big Lottery. The old junior school site was, and still is, extremely important to the project as it was right in the middle of the village, had a public car park adjacent to it, and on the other side of it was a mugger/field that was subject of its own community asset transfer between Raglan Community Council and Monmouthshire County Council. Joined up community facilities at the heart of a community. In 2016, the RVHA made its Stage 1 application to the Big Lottery, supported by a very detailed proven needs analysis, its business plan, and the CAT support from MCC. Note that only 33% of projects get through this stage. Big Lottery recognised the strength and needs of the project, approved the project to go forward to Stage 2. The RVHA then made an initial Stage 2 application, and the lottery approved up to £50,000 as a one-off spend to support the RVA making a full planning application for the site, a condition of any final grant awarded. In 2017, the CAT was extended for a further 2 years. Good progress was being made. In June 2017, the RVHA submitted and received full planning permission, valid until 2022, for the site at a cost to the lottery of £36,000, and then shortly after made the full Stage 2 application. At the end of 2017, the RVHA was devastated when the project lost out in a lottery grant allocation meeting. In May 2018, in parallel, MCC finally made an outline planning permission application for the 45 houses site. At exactly the same time, a planning application was made to build 111 houses on a site in Raglan, a build that would generate over £300,000 in Section 106 money. That application was approved by Council. In late 2018, the RVHA carried out a further consultation with the village and produced a new modular build plan for the community facilities on the site, a plan that was shared with Deb Hill House on behalf of MCC. In March 2019, the RVHA continued to develop its plan, including engaging with Mark Hand in planning and submitting to him and Deb Hill House a funding plan showing the £600,000 of funds and their respective timings, together with a project timeline and architect brief to support the new modular build plan. Deb Hill House was pleased with progress and responded through Councillor Penny Jones that given the ongoing progress on the funding, she would submit a request to Cabinet in July of this year for a further 2-year CAT extension. In early 2019, the Council reapproved the application for 111 houses. In June of this year, the RVHA wrote to Deb Hill House to confirm that she was submitting the CAT extension request. After weeks of chasing, trying to get hold of her by both the RVHA and Councillor Penny Jones, a short email was received in July saying that MCC are unable to consider a further extension as our Education Department have now identified an alternative use for the former junior school. No discussion, no consultation, no formal review, and no reference to Cabinet where the original community asset transfer decision was agreed. In August, the RVHA chair wrote a formal complaint to Paul Matthews. In response, not only did he fail to follow MCC's complaint procedure, his response, and I paraphrase, was that you've had time, so we're moving on with our own project, and after we've taken this to Cabinet, we'll see if there's anything we can do to accommodate any of your needs. On Monday just gone this week, the RVHA sent a 212 signature petition from the residents of Raglan to Paul Matthews stating that they expect MCC, RCC, the Community Council, and RVHA to do all in their power to deliver the site for the planned community facility. So where are we now? There is £600,000 of funding in the pipeline. There would actually be more if the 45 homes were actually built and grant bodies could see that this money was realised and available to the project. There is a planning consent for a community hub on the old junior school site, valid until 2022. 150 new homes are about to be built in the village, bringing another 500 residents in, and at the same time, MCC's executive have decided that fit-for-purpose community facilities are not required. MCC, when they are £2.4 million overspent, are wasting money and resources on a feasibility study for an as-yet undisclosed education project that in the press they are disingenuously at best calling a community facility and, as they are considering other sites, is likely a facility that could be placed elsewhere.
Mr. Johnson, sorry to interrupt you, just to say you're in your final minute. So if you could wrap up, thank you.
I'm there. We are 8 years into the LDP, and the executive who have failed to deliver even a small project, which is completely in their own gift, with all the resources at their disposal, is looking at a community who have achieved an incredible amount of progress on a substantial project with independently validated needs, a project that supports many of the Council's own objectives on adult isolation, sustainable communities, etc., and saying without consideration of the latest status, sorry, you've taken a bit too long. There is no one in the executive who can now make a proper independent review of the situation. I have 5 asks of the committee and I am finished. I would like the councillors to support an application to Cabinet for an extension to the community asset transfer, Cabinet where the decision should have been made. I would like the councillors to take up the complaint made by the chair of the RVHA and make their own independent assessment of the way in which the executive have acted and/or refer this for immediate scrutiny. I would like to recommend the executive cease potentially wasting further resources and money being spent on the feasibility of this site for their own project pending the outcome of Cabinet's decision. I would like the councillors to drive the executive as a priority to actually deliver the 45 homes. Something that could have been, and based on various other select committees' exasperation at the lack of affordable housing in the country, should have been finished many years ago. In summing up, it is more than reasonable that this project should come under scrutiny as it is benefiting from a community asset transfer of council land. However, it is clear that the current executive can no longer be regarded as objective in this regard, and I would ask the councillors on this select committee whether this project should come under their review so that the development of key infrastructure projects in the county is given the objectivity it deserves.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Thanks for bringing this issue to our attention. As I said to you before the meeting, there'll be no debate or discussion on this today. We'll review it as councillors and make a decision should it go on our forward work programme for further scrutiny. But whatever our decision, we will write to you. If you could leave us your contact details, would you be able to do that on perhaps, and leave us the copy of your speech as well? Would that?
Yes.
Would
you like the speech emailed to you? Would that help?
Yeah,
anybody?
that's fine. Yeah,
Yes.
that's absolutely
Who
fine.
would be best?
I
Particularly saying, because I know Mark's email address. Would it be okay if I email through Mark and then he can?
Is that? Are you happy with that, Mark?
Yeah, that'd be fine, Chair. Thank you.
And thank you again, everybody, for your time.
Okay, if we go back to the agenda, then item number 4 is the cabinet member to hold the cabinet member to account on performance alignment, the service delivery of a corporate plan. I think is Emma or Richard gonna kick off? Emma? Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, all. Yes, the report in front of you we've put together to provide an annual update on progress made in 2018-19 on Corporate Plan Priority Goal B, Thriving and Well-Connected County. The purpose of which is to ensure that members have an understanding of council performance and are able to scrutinise how well the authority has performed. Also included in the report is performance information also relevant to 18-19 against a range of nationally set measures used by all councils in Wales. As you'll all be aware, in February 2018, Council approved the corporate plan, so as such this is the first full annual report that we've provided. In the report, Appendix 1 shows our performance management framework, which illustrates how the various strands of our performance fit together. As such, a lot of the information contained in the report will be familiar to you, having already been through the scrutiny process so far. Each of the 5 priority goals in the corporate plan contain commitments to action. So the update provided within Appendix 2 relates to the actions that fall within the remit of this committee, although obviously there will be some crossover with other committees, as I'm sure you'll see. And you'll also see within Appendix 2 that there's an overview of the contribution of that goal to some of the aspects of the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. Each of the commitments to action has been allocated a progress rating that ranges between progressing well, taking steps, attention needed and no activity. And in addition to this, we've also provided an overall rating for the goal itself. And for this particular goal, we've allocated a rating of level 4 good. 3 of the commitments to action we have identified as taking steps, and 2 of which we've identified as progressing well. It is important to point out at this stage that many of the actions included in the report are more focused on the longer term, obviously due to the nature of the corporate plan being over a longer period. So we ask that you consider this when scrutinising progress. To provide a wider picture of progress to date, performance indicators have been laid out in Appendix 3 called Public Accountability Measures. These are actually set by Data Cymru. The data included in the report, again, is that which we feel is most relevant to the remit of this committee and shows how Monmouthshire County Council's performance is benchmarked against other councils in Wales, where this information has been available to us. A report of progress against all 5 of the priority goals is actually being presented to Council on the 19th of September, with a subsequent requirement for publication then by the end of October. So to close, members are invited to scrutinise the report regarding the actions that fall within it, and obviously myself, Richard and the Chief Officers are available for questions if you wish. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. So can I open it up to questions then? Richard, do you want to kick off? I know you wanted to talk about so performance indicators and potentially how the corporate plan could be perhaps restructured slightly.
Thank you, Chair. It was quite noticeable that the Welsh Government figures were just that, figures, whereas our corporate plan has a lot of words, if you like, and rather than figures. So it's more difficult to actually see progress. I can see that progress has been made in words, but it would be good to actually have it in a more numerical format, potentially in the future. I don't know if that's something you can consider for the next plan when it's brought forth. Just a thought. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor. We're always keen to try and make sure where we can, we try and back up the evaluation we provided with evidence, whether that be quantitative, qualitative evidence, or progress where some of these challenges maybe take longer to implement, progress in terms of milestones against targets. So we have, and hope you'll see through the report, tried to incorporate some of the quantitative data where it's available, but recognise going forward as the corporate plan develops that where there is relevant evidence and data, we will look to include it and incorporate it to strengthen our reporting. But hopefully you'll see that there is, throughout the updates, certainly where there is relevant data available for those updates, it has been included to try and evidence the progress.
Did you want to come back, Richard?
I think it's a fair comment from the officer. We'll have more data next time, and if it could be put in a quantitative way, it would be beneficial because it would enable us to grasp the data quicker, I think. I have a second question, if I may, Chair. This is regarding empty properties. I was just curious, does our population, which has a high elderly percentage, influence the data? You can imagine that people are, some elderly people are in homes long term, so properties can't be sold. If this is actually occurring, it would be good to know. And therefore, we could take that into account when looking at the figures. Okay, thank you.
Are you able to respond to that, Mark?
Yeah, Chair. We're doing quite a lot of work on the empty homes at the moment to really dig down and understand what the figures are. The total number's in the region of 700, but the repeat message I keep getting is that a chunk of those are relatively kind of 12-month or so turnover because of probate issues. The actual question you've asked in terms of are any unable to be sold because it's, I suppose, funding somebody's care or part of their savings or their financial backup, I don't know. So we'll have to do a bit of work on unpicking some of that.
Councillor Blakeborough.
Thanks, Chair. Because we live in a rural authority, there's 2 areas I'd just like to ask a few more questions on and to get a little bit more feedback and some update really on further developments. The first area is around digital connectivity, and this is definitely an area which I know Councillor Greenland and Councillor Sarah Jones has been heavily involved in. And obviously I'm aware that we can set our commitments, but sometimes there's barriers put in place sort of that are outside of our control. When looking at the dialogue on here, obviously it suggests that we had phase 1 and Monmouthshire was put at the back of the queue of phase 1 with Superfast Cymru. Now we have Superfast Cymru 2, phase 2. I'm just wondering if you know where we are in the queue of that. There is a gap. It says here there's 12.5% compared to 3% when you're looking at the current deprivation, you know, compare it to, say, Cardiff. So I'd like to know where are we in the queue. Now, I suspect we're not very high, and therefore, what are we doing to maybe do our own thing or negotiate our own thing? Because I know you've been in lots of meetings and negotiations with Welsh Government and BT. I think one of them was to try and get the money ourselves so we can do our own thing. So I'd like to know where we are with that. And then the second area is rural transport. And some exciting work has been done there around some innovative procurement. So again, the questions are around how much have we spent on the procurement of rural transport solutions to date? And where are we with the progress of these working prototypes we've been looking at? Just where are we with that at the moment? Because there were some prototypes that were going to be running within Monmouthshire. That's what it's saying there, and that's what I heard through the grapevine, so I just don't know where we are with that. Thank you.
Kathy, you going to take the Superfast Cymru? Yeah.
In terms of the Superfast Cymru 2, we're actually now one of the authorities, one of 7, as part of the Wales Rural Broadband Task Force. We only met for the first time yesterday, so we're working directly with Welsh Government, really, with regards to what their plans are moving forward with Superfast Cymru 2. There is an acceptance that we need to sort of start sorting things out ourselves, really, rather than waiting. We put forward the Digital Infrastructure Action Plan to Cabinet yesterday, which was approved. That enables us now to have a policy position to move forward with any commercial opportunities. So if we've got altnets or basically alternative broadband providers other than Openreach, then that allows us to have those dialogues, or enables us to have those dialogues really more directly. We also had approval to sort of consider commercial loans from the authority to these companies to enable them to move at speed. Should any of those progress, they would go forward to the investment committee for approval. We are also looking to set up a strategic infrastructure working group internally. Part of the issues that there are with regards sort of way leaves, access to public sector assets, that kind of thing. So we're going to be working on that with planning colleagues, highways, etc., so we can move quickly. And really, generally, around the rural authorities around the table yesterday, we were all in a very similar situation. We're all taking our own steps now, and certainly we'll be working more closely with colleagues, sharing best practice. For example, Pembrokeshire are also moving forward with a similar digital infrastructure action plan. Carmarthenshire are also considering doing something similar. So we really are kind of just getting on with it now, really. With regard to rural transport, it's worth updating in terms of the GovTech Challenge. We've announced today we're the first council to actually go forward with phase 2. So we've got 2 companies now that are going to be working on rural loneliness and rural transport projects, one of which is Thrive, who actually have been doing some work with Bridges Community Centre around some of their community car sharing schemes. So that'll be the focus of the next 12 months, working directly with that private sector to sort of see what options we can sort of start to develop, really, what prototypes they can come up with. So that's moving on quite well. We've also got various sort of Internet of Things projects that we're working on under LEADER, also looking at LoRaWAN networks in terms of sensors. We're also looking at 5G opportunities as well. So there's a fair bit going on in addition to what we'd already been doing, really. So it's moving forward at quite a pace now.
thanks for that, because obviously, in a way, this report, it short sells us. That makes no sense at all. It doesn't give the full sort of up-to-date report. In terms of the broadband, so we're deciding to do our own thing rather than waiting, and I think that is the right move. Do you think Welsh Government will relinquish any of that funding so we can develop our own sort of strategy and connection?
That's not clear at the moment. They're looking to sort of open reach really for additional contracts at the moment. However, as time moves on, I would hope that yes, they would. We've given them various options to consider. And we hope that they will do that. But at the same time, we need to be coming at it on all fronts. Really, we understand we need a hybrid solution. So looking at fibre, wireless, etc. You know, given the topography of the county, really. So we will just keep ensuring that we keep sort of pushing our cases forward. Really, yeah.
And in terms of internal resources, because this is so time-consuming and actually so important. Is there any sort of, are we looking at maybe getting a full-time work? Because I know various people within the team have taken on bits and pieces of it. Is there any money within the team so that we can have one dedicated person to bring all this together? Because it is so time-consuming bringing all this forward.
That is also something we're talking about with Welsh Government. We are not the only authority in this situation. As far as Gwynedd have got the same issues, that they haven't got the bodies on the ground to actually sort of deal with all the issues that are coming forward, and that's something that we're campaigning for with Welsh Government.
Is there anything we can do as members to support you with that?
Potentially, yes, we may come back to you.
Thank you, Councillor Raper. Councillor David, did you want to ask anything?
With regard to the telephones, we've struck up a conversation with the Forest of Dean, who are doing an awful lot in this area as well. Might I suggest that I think you have some communications with them, that those are worth following up. I went to a meeting recently that they held, and they would be very happy to see if there wasn't some progress that we could make together to make a stronger case for the area, because the county borders, if you like, suffers from exactly the same problems. Thank you, Chair.
I've got a question, it's probably to you, Kath, in terms of opportunities for young people seeking employment. That Year 11 cohort, that NEET cohort, has obviously gone up slightly. What does that percentage equate to in terms of numbers? I'm putting you on the spot here.
Yeah, I can get that figure forward.
No, that's fine. It's low. Yeah. Yeah. And how are we publicising the I2A and I2W schemes, particularly with those just leaving school? How are they being made aware of the opportunities?
We have officers actually based within the schools who are in constant contact really and working with those pupils. The issue we had this year was all around data sharing and actually getting access to that data to enable us to actually contact those students directly. So although it shows an increase, it's not quite clear in terms of actually that they also could be in college and we haven't been told. So that issue is being sorted directly with Careers Wales. The team are on that. Our education colleagues are also aware of that issue, and there's actually the meeting tomorrow to ensure that doesn't happen again. So, yeah.
I've got a couple of questions on Cardiff Capital Region. Probably one is a bit more technical and the other is probably will be directed to Councillor Greenland. The first one, the technical one, in terms of the 46 technicians that have started, do we know in terms of their location, the sort of Denison location, are they local people? Are those people who've sort of migrated to the area? Are those jobs being generated for local people? I know that it's obviously high-skilled jobs, you know, in terms of longer term, and developing the education centres co-located with the facility will be, you know, ensuring there's a throughput of engineers that'll go through, you know, the process of being upskilled. But it's just trying to understand those figures early on.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure of the geographical location of where those people have come from, but that's something we can get a breakdown for you on in terms of the numbers and their location. They may very well have relocated to the area or may have originated from there, but that's something I'll take away as an action for you. Thank you.
So yes, Councillor Greenland?
Yeah, can I just come in here, because as chair of the Foundry company, I do have a bit of knowledge about this. First of all, that figure has gone up from 45. It's over 50 now. And as the numbers of clean rooms comes on, then there will be further increasing. I think the issue really in terms of local jobs is, and this is something that IQE have found quite difficult at the moment, is getting through to schools in particular that A-level students, A-level leavers, could go into that company, local people could go into that company and begin earning quite high salaries at the same time as being trained up as technicians, and then if they wish to go on to be engineers. IQE will also support new graduate or new A-level students through any further qualifications that they need. And it's really, we need to get this message out across our schools. Unfortunately, many of our schools consider that all of their students, if possible, should go to university, and don't see IQE as a really good opportunity for a career. And here is an opportunity for young people to leave school, to go into further training, to be earning quite big money, and we're talking about something like 20,000 plus. And so to have no student debt and to go on getting further qualifications, this is something that we should be opening up to our school leavers. And I am a little bit disappointed that at the moment our schools don't seem to be sufficiently aware of the opportunities there are for them.
Thanks, Councillor Greenland. So obviously, just to come back to that, how do we get over that hurdle then? Is that a concerted communications effort between the deal partners? Is that in collaboration with Welsh Government? How do we get that message to schools?
Well, the first thing is that I've suggested that head teachers of our schools, our secondary schools, should come initially to look around the IQE site and to see the opportunities there are for their students. And then if there is even any sort of interest, then I'm sure we could arrange that actually sixth form students could come and speak directly to IQE so that they have the opportunity to see what's there for themselves. We are actively pursuing this at the moment.
My other question in terms of City Deal, obviously, you know, the programme got off to a fantastic start in terms of anchoring the compound semiconductor plant in Newport. There's obviously a lot of discussions and work going on around the metro. I still have concerns that obviously us on the periphery as a peripheral council, some of the I suppose capital elements that will be realised may not be completely beneficial to us, although we've obviously led on the compound semiconductor work, which was great. There's an element that worries me about with the Gateway Review coming up in 2 years' time, and I'm still not convinced that the director of the programme has got the resources to drive some of these elements forward in terms of making progress. Are you concerned that we may miss We may miss that hurdle when that gateway review comes, that we may not carry on in terms of a programme. Is there a big risk there in terms of this early stages of programme development?
Well, that really is probably a question that it'd be better going to the leader, who is a member of the regional cabinet. But personally, having seen what is going on and the progress that is being made, I'm not concerned about that. I believe that we will make that gateway, and there are a lot of opportunities in the pipeline which have got to be nailed down, admittedly, but we know from the amount of time that it took us to get IQE across the line from the time that we initially spoke to them. These things don't come quickly, and obviously in terms of spending our public money on that, we need to do a lot of due diligence as we move forward to ensure that the money is being spent wisely. But there are a lot of opportunities that are in the pipeline at the moment, I do know that.
Oh, Kath. Oh, sorry, you've got an update on the NEAT numbers. That was quick.
Thank you. I can confirm that we're 12 young people NEET in Year 11 in 2018 compared to 10 in Year 11 in 2017. So the difference is actually 2.
So the numbers are small. Okay. Any other further questions? Councillor Dovey?
One thing that does concern me with regard to the targets and the pressures that we are putting in place to provide jobs for our young people, what concerns me is whether the curriculum that is being put in front of our young people to achieve success in these IT sectors is quite right. Well, well, maybe not even quite right. If it is right, I do make it my business to look at elsewhere for a number of reasons. And what is happening in terms of education in the areas of Gloucestershire bordering our county is in stark contrast to what seems to be the urgency, if you like, that we have here and the targets that we have here. And I'm not just talking about the county and its targets, I'm talking about the targets that come out from Welsh Government. The fact of the matter is, in the areas of Gloucestershire, the Forest of Dean particularly, the education there is focused solely on preparing the children for the needs of industry coming to this area. And they see this area, Bristol, new industries coming into the Forest of Dean. A lot of those are coming from GCHQ, and they see the opportunities that will be available to their young people with their qualifications in Monmouthshire and Newport area. I worry that we are a bit myopic in that we look at what is happening within ourselves as a county rather than being aware of what is happening around us as a county, and what is the word I'm looking for? The ambition that they have for their young people.
Is there a question there, David? Or is
yes,
that?
I think the question is: have we got the focus right on our education for our young people in the area to take advantage of these jobs that are coming along, not only in Wales, but around us? Because other people are looking at preparing their young people for jobs that are not only available in, say, South Gloucestershire, but also in Monmouthshire and farther west into Newport and those sort of areas. I think we are in a very competitive situation as far as the education is concerned. And I believe that.
Yeah, it's probably a question maybe directed at the Chief Officer for Education. I know, looking at the our LDP review, the concerns that have been raised by members not having a further education opportunities within the county, and that's something that needs to be addressed. In terms of the new curriculum that's coming on stream in the next couple of years, I mean, it's going to be difficult. It's a difficult one to see, in terms of ensuring that our learners are equipped with all the right skills and abilities to capture some of these opportunities. But as I said, it's probably difficult for officers to answer that question. Sorry, David. You're looking at me, Riley, there. If there's any other questions, then no other questions. Okay, can I thank Emma and Richard for their presentation, and obviously thank Councillor Greenland for fielding questions on that as the cabinet member. If we go on then to the next item, and because we've got members of the planning committee here, I've been asked if we can raise up the item 6 up to item 5 and item 7 up to item 6. So, sorry, Mark, we're going to push your agenda item a bit further down. So if we can take then the current local development plan annual monitoring report, scrutiny of annual performance. Are you going to lead on this, Mark? Yeah.
Chair, if you're happy, I'll do a quick intro, and then Rachel will cover the detail of the reports. And likewise on the following item, Chair, if that's okay, Phil will cover the detail of the reports.
Talk amongst yourselves.
Are you happy to start the verbal response, Mark, or do we need the presentation? Is it crucial?
It would help, but
Can you filibuster?
I am so.
No, apologies, Chair. We were just seeing if we can make it show on the TV screens, even if we can't get the big screen to appear. We know which button to press, we just can't find the button. So the first item, Chair, is the Local Development Plan Annual Monitoring Report. So I won't talk through any of the detail. I'll pass over to Rachel to do that. It might seem like a slightly strange piece of work to bring to you, even though, as you well know, we're working on the new LDP. But it is a requirement of the regulations to carry on monitoring the existing local development plan. But that does provide some some helpful evidence in our ongoing work. So other than that intro, I just take the opportunity to praise the team for the work that's gone into this report. It is a really significant piece of work and very time consuming, especially when they're busy working on the new LDP. So credit to them for getting both done in a timely fashion. So I'll pass over to Rachel and hope that any second now the slides appear.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah.
You should be back on there again.
Here we go. Thanks. So this AMR is the 5th AMR for the adopted LDP, and it covers a period 1st of April 2018 to the 31st of March 2019. The findings show that many of the indicator targets have been achieved, which is good news, and we've got fewer red ratings recorded during this period compared to the last one, which is mainly due to improved performance in terms of completions of dwellings, including affordable homes, affordable housing permissions, and progress on allocated sites. So we start with the positives. In your report and in the main report, there's a lot more detail on this, but these are the key headlines really. So we've had 443 dwelling completions, including 131 affordable, which is the highest we've recorded since the LDP's adoption, which is good news and shows that the plan is working in terms of delivering homes. 598 dwelling units granted permission, 157 of which are for affordable. And a further 4 allocated housing sites gained permission, Crick Road, Port Skewett, Chepstow Road, Raglan, and 2 main village sites, Dingerstow and Landvale Kilgeddin. We have a total of just over 40 hectares of employment land available, and we had a range of employment permissions granted for B uses as well, totaling 4.88 hectares. A number of rural diversification schemes and rural enterprise schemes were also approved, a total of 7. 22 tourist accommodation schemes approved, from holiday lets, hotel and glamping accommodation. And in terms of retail, vacancy rates in all of the shopping areas, with the exception of Chepstow and Usk, were below the GB rate, which was 11.5%. There were, however, 3 red ratings for this AMR. The key one being the housing land supply, which was recorded at 4 years. But it is notable that that's an increase from the previous year when we had 3.9. And we think that's mainly due to our positive policy approach to departure sites. There's 1 allocated strategic housing site that is yet to obtain permission. That's at Vinegar Hill, Indy. But we expect an application during the next monitoring period. There's also been a decrease of development permitted on brownfield sites. And it's actually the lowest figure recorded in all of the AMR periods. We think this is reflective of the limited opportunities and scope for brownfield development in the county. But it's something we're going to look at as part of the LDP revision process. So just to sum up, the recommendations of the AMR is just to continue to work on the replacement plan to ensure continued plan coverage. Members are probably aware that the next formal stage of the process is the preparation of the preferred strategy, which we're currently working on, and we anticipate bringing that to Council in December. Second recommendation is to submit the 5th AMR to Welsh Government by the 31st of October, and thirdly, to continue to monitor the adopted plan through further AMRs. So the recommendation for this committee is to note the contents of the AMR and to comment accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Councillor Devi, sorry, can you just click your microphone off?
Chair.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Questions? Councillor Begborough, I know you had some questions in terms of linking the old and new LDP review process. Thank you.
Yeah, it's sort of quite a generic question, I think, really. Because I know we did take some time to revise the LDP because we're looking at properties outside or planning areas outside of the LDP so we could meet our targets and what have you. And I'm just wondering, in terms of making it seamless, what information have we got from this LDP that we can inform the new LDP that we're looking at? So it's just what lessons have we learned, but also what information have we got that we can then take forward into the next LDP?
Yeah. So with the replacement plan, we're working on a new evidence base, and part of that is the AMR process. So we're looking at policies which have worked, which haven't worked, the delay in delivering the sites, because there has been a lag. Unlike some authorities in Wales, our sites are deliverable, but they've just taken a longer time to come forward than we anticipated. So there's that. So taking that forward to the next plan, we'd look to have much more detail at examination stage, so almost like an outline application, and the site should come along more quickly then. So I think that's the key in terms of site delivery. But more generally, we're just updating our evidence base. It includes that, the review report, and commissioning additional work to inform the strategy now going forward.
Jeff, if I could supplement that. I suppose a lot of the other stuff isn't so much around the new evidence, but just around our experience. So as a team, the development management part and the planning policy part meet on it's now a bi-monthly time, just so we can fit in the work on the LDP itself. But to go through new policy challenges, what has worked, what hasn't. So the AMR gives some, I suppose, fairly formalised reporting on that, but we do just go through via those meetings and what we call pod meetings, where we just discuss complex applications and how do we apply the policies, just to learn what's working and what isn't. We've had meetings with some of the people that have put forward what we call the 60-40 sites, so the small rural sites with 60% affordable housing, to understand from them what has worked and what hasn't, and that's thrown up several challenges around viability and the smallest of those sites. So that's something that will feed into the next plan. We've met with young farmers, and I forget the names of the other farming groups, Community Land, Country Land Association, and the Welsh Farming Group, just to talk about some of their challenges going forwards. I mean, to be honest, a lot of those very uncertain. We're going to have a meeting without mentioning Brexit for a second, but there's a lot of uncertainty around that. So, they're not quite sure, are we in the realms of having to produce more food, or are we in the realms of lack of subsidies, so they need to diversify? So we'll probably end up with policies that are quite flexible in that approach. In terms of experience, Rachel mentioned brownfield sites as one of the indicators that's dropped. But as you all know, the reality of the county is we haven't got much brownfield land, which is good in the sense that our industries aren't closing and we aren't needing to redevelop those, but we don't have much in the first place. The two key sites have already come forward through the planning process. So the Maybe Bridge sites and Sudbrook Paper Mill sites. Hence, in last annual monitoring report, that figure was high, and this year it's lower. That's taught us a lot in terms of viability that we talk about with planning committee on a frequent basis. And we've sought recently to amend the affordable housing policy to tighten up on that in terms of arguments about viability, and also to be more realistic about what we're seeking. So I think there's loads of lessons learned in that sense. We've learned from, on a regional basis, from what other authorities are doing as well. We've met with Swansea on a regional basis. They're being held in high regard for the way in which they've produced a trajectory of development for their LDP. Whereas we, I think, expected a pretty flat level of growth with all the sites coming forward quickly, and then a level trajectory of housing delivery. That isn't how it's worked in reality. So we'll look at doing that again. And then there's other changes externally from the Welsh Government in terms of what the new LDP needs to look like. So we're meeting on a regional basis to learn how that's shaped. In particular, a massive focus on deliverability and viability of sites. Which is largely driven by a lot of authorities that have sites in their plan that just haven't come forward. We're fortunate, as Rachel said, that we haven't got that problem. They've been slower than we wanted, but I don't think we've got any strategic sites that aren't going to come forward. The remaining one, we're expecting an application by Christmas, if not sooner. And the remaining part of Druin Farm, the same. So yeah, it's learning, I think, around some of those challenges. But But we do have a really good working relationship with various stakeholders, utility groups, developers. So we've been trying to talk through all of this with them and understand what we need from them and what they need for us in producing the next LDP.
Oh, that's brilliant. To be honest, I don't doubt that you have learnt from experience and you move it forward. You always do. You seem to always develop your policies as a result. Within the next LDP, is there anything in there in terms of at least discussing the idea of a new settlement? Because obviously we keep adding on to existing towns, adding on to existing villages, which cause all sorts of problems. So in terms of really planning ahead for the next 10, 20 years rather than just the next 4 or 5 years, does the new LDP have anything in there about at least exploring a new settlement idea?
Yes and no. It is part of the strategic spatial options that we consulted on. 2 of the 5 options included provision for a new settlement. So it was certainly something we wanted to consider via LDP. But we have had a letter from the Welsh Government from our consultation saying that, in their opinion, we cannot have a new settlement in our LDP because Planning Policy Wales 10 says it should be, if you have a new settlement, it should be via a joint LDP or a strategic development plan. So we've had a bit of a debate as officers. In their view, it's very black and white. In my view, it isn't. It says should. And PPW 10 is very clear about when it says should and when it says must and what the 2 words mean. But it's especially clear that they aren't changing their mind. And they've said that if we proceed with a new settlement and our LDP on its own, we will have what's called a Category A objection, which means our plan is fundamentally unsound because it contradicts national planning policy and will crash and burn at that later stage. So as things stand and what we've started discussing with Cabinet Member, but this is relatively recent, as you'll appreciate, it does look like we've gone through various options. You know, do we take it on the chin? Do we ignore it? Do we challenge it? Et cetera, et cetera. I think any concept of a new settlement is going to have to wait for the strategic development plan. And we're bringing a report to Council on the 19th of September to get the Council's agreement to sign up to the SDP, along with the other 9 authorities in the region doing the same this autumn. So the idea isn't dead and buried, but it is one that we can't proceed with at the moment, frustratingly. But there are other opportunities that we're looking at for addressing the issues and the objectives of the plan. So we're not beaten yet, but it is a setback in what we were hoping to achieve.
Okay, thanks. Any further questions, Councillor? Councillor Brown, I'm just conscious that we are obviously scrutinising the past financial year's report, annual performance report. So I don't want to stray into the LDP review work, which is ongoing. We've got another workshop session this coming Monday, and I want to try and keep the discussion separate because we still got quite a bit to get through. So, Councillor Brown.
Just a very quick question to follow up from what was being said. Presumably these spatial policy will have to take account of the recently published national framework for Wales, which obviously covers the whole of Wales. I presume the answer to that is yes, but just as a very quick question. The other question I've got is, how do you actually determine the 5-year supply, and how does this compare to other local authorities in Wales in terms of their supply? Because obviously we did have that instance where the Minister said it's up to you whether or not you want to continue with that. So Those are the questions, because obviously the LDP covers a larger period, and the 5-year supply, as I understand it, is sort of from one point in time and then 5 years on. So it's a bit of a moving feast. So if you could explain to us simply how the 5-year supply works and whether that will be applying to the next plan as well.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. In terms of the first part of the question, the National Development Framework, the short answer is yes, it will be a statutory development plan when it's adopted in September 2020. It's what Welsh Government's aiming for. So by the time our plan goes to examination, that will be adopted and our plan will have to be in conformity. The challenge is all we have at the moment is a draft plan with some fairly significant proposals that cause some significant concerns in some regards. But on that topic, Chair, and you mentioned the next workshop coming up, I was going to talk to you afterwards. I'll be circulating the draft National Development Framework to all members later on this week, and it is intended to actually swap around the topics for the LDP workshops and to have the NDF as the focus of the next one, subject to Chair's agreement later. So don't take that as read necessarily, but that was our intention. So we can talk through that, and then it's likely we'll be bringing a paper to Council in October to do our consultation response to that document. So it is relevant. Our challenge is, at the moment we have a draft document that's out to consultation. We don't know how much of that is certain, or how much, I'm not sure whether you and I might agree on the detail, but how much of that will make it into the final comments or the final version. So we're not quite sure what we're aligning with at the moment, which is one of our challenges. We knew all along it would be a challenge. So that's that part, but we'll have far more discussion about that in a future workshop. The 5-year housing land supply, although in July last year, Technical Advice Note 1 was amended to delete paragraph 6.2, which said we had to give our lack of 5-year housing land supply considerable weight. The Minister's letter said it was then up to the decision maker to decide how much weight to give it, and we brought that report through Council. I think it's fair to say we're the only council, I think still in Wales, that's actually done that as a formal decision process. I think others are possibly taking it application by application or aren't too worried. However, although that sentence has been removed, Planning Policy Wales 10 and the rest of TAN 1 still requires us to have a 5-year housing land supply. It still tells us how to measure it, and that land supply has to be realistically deliverable. So the whole mechanism around how we measure it around Wales is consistent. It's set out by Welsh Government and everyone does it the same way at the same time. Ours has just increased from 3.9 years to 4.0 years, so marginal, but a plus. The other 9 authorities in the Cardiff Capital Region, their land supply has gone down in every single case. So we're the only one that's bucked the trend. Only 2 of the 10 authorities in South East Wales have a 5-year supply. That's the Vale of Glamorgan and Newport. The others have less, some of them far, far less. So I think RCT is in the realms of 1.3 years, something in that region. So it's a mixed bag in the region, various different reasons. Some of the Valleys authorities mainly around site viability and developer interest or lack of. Ours has been due to time lag primarily, but everyone is measuring it in the same way. We should be able to collate the information for the whole of Wales actually and give you, if members wanted, just a list of what every authority in Wales has got. So we can work on collating that if people want to see the figures. Thanks, Chair.
Are you happy with that, Councillor Brown? Yeah. I think if you could, Mark, if that's not too arduous piece of work, then I think that'll be useful for members to see. While we're on the this particular issue, I know Councillor Breakborough, you indicated in the pre-meeting you wanted to raise the issue about sites outside of the LDP.
Yeah, it was just that because we weren't meeting targets with affordable housing and market housing, particularly affordable housing, we reviewed this present LDP and suggested that actually what we could do is look at sites outside the LDP and look at them on an individual basis and set them against a strict set of criteria to look at it as if we should bring it in. So I guess I'd like to know the developments of that. So as a result of that, how many more housing have we managed to achieve? And has that helped us meet our targets? And has there been any problems with it? Because obviously a lot of people were concerned about looking outside the LDP. Yeah.
In terms of actual delivery on the ground, nothing's been completed yet. In terms of permissions, we've approved 70 at Rockfield Road in Monmouth, and there's an application for further 60 that we're just trying to resolve a Welsh Water issue on. There's 130 at Church Road, Caldicott that's been approved, and we're expecting the detailed consent in fairly imminently. It was 110, I think, outline, 115 outline at Grove Farm, Llanffoist, and we've just approved the details at committee this week for, I think it's just slightly fewer, 106. So that will be starting fairly imminently. That will probably be the first one to come forward. And then there's the 111 at Raglan, which the council's approved, has been called in by Welsh Government, and we're expecting a decision on the 23rd of October. So the planning inspector's made his recommendation. We don't know what it is yet. The minister's decision's expected on the 23rd of October, and that's when we find out both halves. And we've also got a current application in for a site called Bayfield in Chepstow for approximately 200 homes. So that will become before committee in the next couple of months, I expect, for consideration, but we're still dealing with that ourselves as officers. So in terms of actual completions, none so far. In terms of permissions and how they factor into the 5-year housing land supply, it has made a positive difference, which is why our figure's gone up, not down. We did a bit of work, and my colleague worked out what the figure would have been without those sites. So not all of those are factored into the 5-year land supply already. So Raglan's not factored into the 4.0 years because it hasn't gone through the full consent process yet, nor is Bayfield's or the other 60 at Rockfield Road, because they haven't gone through a decision-making process yet. But I think it made the difference from something like 3.7 years up to 4.0. I'll check on that figure for you, but it certainly made a difference. In terms of any issues, we've learnt from the Raglan appeal that we need to look at the housing mix at the outline stage, not reserve matters. So that's a lesson learnt we've picked up on. But every single one of those sites has delivered what we've asked, the full 35% affordable housing, or 25% in the south. 35% everywhere, isn't it? 35% everywhere. In terms of other issues, they haven't been popular with local residents. There's no point pretending otherwise. Partly through normal planning issues, and partly through the concept of doing things outside of the LDP. My personal view is it was the right thing to do, and it has been the right thing to do. And in projecting forward what we need for the next LDP, it's already going to benefit that process. So yeah, but I won't pretend to it's been universally popular. It hasn't been.
I've got a question, and it may be to you, Mark, but it quite possibly is to Kath, actually, in terms of vacancy rates of retail outlets. We've obviously had good coverage recently in the media about Chepstow and Caldicott, sort of bucking the trend. And it's good that Usk is in this in the report as well. What is happening in those areas? I mean, there may be some retail businesses, and they may say to me, particularly in Chepstow, that it doesn't quite feel like that. But obviously, in terms of the figures and the quantitative data you're getting and inquiries you're getting, what is the effect there in Chepstow and Caldicott that's sort of bucking that trend? What is it that's doing that?
I think in Chepstow, the main issue is that you've got a couple of prominent shops right at the top of the high street that are empty, that give you the impression the rest of the town is struggling. But as you move further down the high street, it isn't an issue. In terms of Caldicott, we're seeing a difference in terms of the regeneration scheme that's about to sort of start come October, November. But I think, Rachel, you've got more up-to-date figures of you in terms of the vacancy rates. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Thanks, Mark. 4 centres recorded a rise in vacancy rates. So Caldecott 8.8 to 10.6. Chepstow was quite significant, 5.9 to 11.8. Esk 9.7 to 15.8, and Raglan from 0 to 9. But that's just reflective of one unit because it's such a small central shopping area, so it's proportionately it's only one unit. The other centres are performing better, but yeah, there has been a recorded increase, and as we've said in the presentation, Esk and Chepstow are above the GB average, which is 11.5% at the moment.
What it might be pertinent to you, Rachel. What data do we capture from those businesses that do set up? Do we know whether they've migrated in? Are they local businesses that are expanding? Are they people who are changing career course and taking a punt on retail in a particular niche area that they really feel that they can make a business workable? Do we capture some of that stuff?
No, we don't, I'm afraid. It's purely quantitative data. So we just go out, survey the central shopping areas and just record the number of vacancies and what use is in each unit within those centres. So we don't have any qualitative data to support that, unfortunately.
Councillor Dovey.
Thank you, Chairman. I must admit that I'm a little puzzled about the figures for Chepstow. When we talk about these figures here, are we talking in terms of retail stores? Do they include restaurants and that sort of thing? Because if you look at the high street in Chepstow, the big movement is in bars and stores. We've even got a cocktail bar opposite the main car park there by Wetherspoons. And so down through that part of the town, you could say it is quite vibrant. I don't recognise that anywhere really north of that, because there are Herbert Lewis's is still closed. There was the next news agent up towards the Arch is closed, and you go through the Arch and further up on the right-hand side there are other businesses that are closed. The one place that is making a difference, I suspect, is the one at the bottom by the roundabout where you come off the motorway, and it used to be sold garden furniture and all sort of things. And there is a multi-offer store gone in there from a big group where you can buy your meat in there. You could probably buy a truck if they could find somewhere to put it. And that is really moving quite extraordinarily. And that is going to have an impact. I don't think we've got to the point of being able to measure that yet. But I think that has got to have an impact on the town itself, because they are selling everything across lines, from washing powder to Christmas cards, to kids' bikes, to food and garden centres. That's a lot. They are a new phenomenon in the high street. They're a new multiple that's set up, and they're in various places. So I don't recognise the buoyancy that you're talking about in Chepstow. I don't see where it's coming from, unless it's coming from the catering and bar sector of the town, which is down towards the river. Maybe that's all down to my efforts, but I just don't recognise what's happening, because the little what was a pub up at the top, which is the Star, and that was turned into a sort of cafe meeting place and whatnot. That's closed. The newsagent up at the top there, that's closed. You know, I just don't understand it at all. And the other thing that goes through my mind is
Dave, sorry, Dave. Is there there's a question coming? Is there?
Yeah.
Okay.
It is. The question is, how are these figures coming about? Because I don't recognise them, and I don't recognise the reasons for them to be there. It doesn't.
So you're asking, in terms of vacancy, is it more than retail? Is that what you're trying to? Is it wider in terms of the categorisation? Is that what you're trying to ask?
It might be the way the categorisation. That is what I'm asking the officers how this has come about. I'd like to know more about the analysis, if you will.
Thank you. Just to confirm, in Chepstow, the vacancy rate has gone up during the last monitoring period. So it's gone from 5.9 to 11.8. So it has increased. So reflecting what you were saying about certain retail units closing. So there has been that effect in Chepstow, that trend. So yeah, it's not as vibrant in that sense as it was in the last monitoring report, because vacancy rates have increased in the town centre.
Yeah, in terms of what we measure, we look at the central shopping area that we've defined in the RDP, and we measure whether the building's occupied or not. If it's vacant, it's in the vacancy rate, which is increasing. But we don't just measure shops, so A1 retail uses in planning jargon, but we look at other uses as well and record what those different uses are. So I think coming back to the point that Councillor Bakeborough mentioned earlier about lessons for the next LDP, everyone's recognising that the way town centres work is changing, the way shoppers act is changing. So we'll need to review those policies and review those central shopping areas. Perhaps the core of those towns needs to restrict, and we need to be more flexible on other bits on the edges. If there's other things we need to do to facilitate businesses, then happy to look at that. But there's very much, I think, a trend from people going to town and coming away with, I was going to say a carry bag, with a paper bag with a good in it, to having gone in and had a coffee / some kind of leisure experience. It's moving more towards the latter. So we need to reconsider that going forwards, and quite how we adapt to that. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that our vacancy rate trends probably correlate quite nicely with business rate increases. They've both gone up at the same time.
Thanks, Mark. I probably skewed the discussion, David, and that's probably what you were sort of confused about when I mentioned that the media reports that Chepstow and Caldecott were bucking the trend, and it would probably, although this is a year previous, the vacancy rates are still an issue, and that's what I probably confused you in terms of that discussion. Yeah, briefly, and I've got a few other members to come in as well.
Could I just say, there is the other big thing that has changed. You have a new public coming into Chepstow. There's a lot of change in the house ownership in Chepstow, and virtually all of them are coming from across the water. The thing that's going with that is the people that are coming across the water, from across the water, are used to shopping in Bristol, and the bridge toll has come off now. So they just pop across to Bristol and do their shopping up at the Mall. So there's a lot of things going on with Chepstow, and of course it's over 15 years since it had the town centre looked at, and what was done at that time was a disaster, because it was in no way focused on making the town a better place to shop. It was turned into some sort of a stone museum, really, as far as the High Street is concerned.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Debbie.
So that is something I want.
Yeah, you just clip your microphone off. I got Councillor Roden, Councillor Brown, and then I got Councillor Greenland, and I'll probably give the last word to him on this item. Okay, if that's okay. Councillor Roden.
Thank you, Chair. Item 3.8, you commented on the lack of housing supply. Make a case for more allocation of sites is needed, based on the fact that we have slow development with the current sites, really. So how can we speed up the current development sites, if possible? And if we can't, is there anybody else that can assist us with this? Thank you, Chair.
That's a good question. I think part of the challenge probably links back to what we thought was going to happen when we adopted the last LDP. I think there's text in that actually expected all of the strategic sites to have planning consent by the end of 2014. This was in February 2014, so I think that was just unrealistic in the first place. Quite often what happens as LDPs are progressing now is if sites are in the proposed plan that gets put forward to Welsh Government, developers will start to put in outline planning applications and try and demonstrate that certainty of delivery and reduce those timescales alongside the examination process, which can actually be helpful. It's a risk to them, but by that stage the council's already said it should be in their deposit plan, and that's gone forward to Welsh Government. So that can help speed up the process. That's something that didn't happen in the current plan, and that can save us the best part of a year in terms of site delivery. But realistically, it does take round about 2 years for people to get outline consent, then detail, deal with conditions, open up the sites, get on there, and actually have the first completion. So it is, it isn't a massively quick process. So I think that's probably the first thing. I think we learned from the last plan that we had several large strategic sites, and they take a bit longer to come forward. So perhaps more of a mix in site size or just an appreciation of whatever we put in the plan, being realistic about speed. There's been criticism of us as an authority, and there was comment made earlier about the Chepstow Road site in Raglan. Our own sites as a council have been slow to come forward. I think that's for various different reasons. I think all of them have been with laudable intent. So Crick Road, we've been looking at doing a joint venture with Mellin and going through that process. So that's taken some time to get a really good scheme, but it is now coming through. The reserve matters for that application's in now. So we're talking a matter of months really before that can be dealt with and development commence. Chepstow Road, Raglan, we've had many conversations about can that be done in a slightly different way as a way of making that attractive to small developers or even service plots. So we were trying to look at doing it in a different way to normal. And I think, if we're honest, with Rockfield Farm, that was the most straightforward and traditional approach, which was selling a parcel of land to a developer. But I think that was probably the first one we've done, was a bit of a learning curve. I would suggest we maybe took on too much in-house in terms of the capacity we had to resolve some of those issues. So I think learning in with that too. Some of the other sites that haven't come forward so quickly are probably related to one of the registered social landlords, and they've now set up, they hit the ground building their own homes as a private developer as well as affordable. So that's really starting to take some speed now. So I think there's other players in the market have been learning as well. And I think we can't ignore the fact the plan came out in the middle of an economic downturn. The market has picked up and is picking up really quite strongly in Monmouthshire. We haven't seen the problems that some areas have had. We've had the matters around the 7 tolls, which has made Monmouthshire more attractive to people moving in. But for that initial period, there was a lot of uncertainty in the house building industry around bringing those sites forward. So I think it's been for a fairly big range of reasons, rather than one single silver bullet fixing them all. But yeah, lessons to learn going forwards. But part of that will just be about being a little bit more realistic, I think, about how long some of these things do take. Sorry, the one bit I didn't mention was in terms of the planning process. So Maybe Bridge, for example, we had an 18-month holding objection from the Welsh Government about air quality and traffic capacity. So that was 18 months that nobody particularly saw coming, and we just had to put the application to one side while that was resolved, and then work on all the other bits afterwards. I think in theory we could have done some of the other bits in parallel with that holding process, but there was so much unknown in terms of what the outcome of that Welsh Government investigation would be and what that would mean financially and in terms of viability, that there were aspects that we just couldn't proceed with, or the developer couldn't proceed with. So yeah, various things. Similarly, Dairy Farm, the cost of undergrounding the pylons doubled between LDP adoption and reality. So there's a lot of work done around that viability of the scheme, getting agreements from Western Power to do it.
Councillor Roden. Yep.
Thank you. And thank you, Mark. That's a very interesting response. Just one further question for me, a short one, is do you prioritise large developments in terms of pushing things through, if you can, from your side, or do all planning applications get equal weight as they arrive? Thank
you. Generally speaking, we try and do everything as efficiently and expediently as we can. So I wouldn't say that we prioritise them as such, although we have entered into one planning performance agreement with the Maybury Bridge developers, and we're looking to enter into another one. So that's a process whereby, in effect, they're paying the council for an enhanced service, not an outcome, but an agreement to adhere to a timetable that works both ways. So the Maybury Bridge scheme went through on that process. And that involved various departments, so not just the development management team, but the green infrastructure team, environmental health, highways are all involved. And that planning performance agreement included the post-planning highways legal framework, which developers find takes quite a long time and adds to uncertainty. So in essence, they pay an amount of money that's agreed for us to resource that service. So we either get consultants in, as was the case in highways, to do some extra backfilling. So highways officers prioritise that work, a consultant backfilled some of the smaller, more easy stuff, or we get extra staff in. We've got a post approved in the planning team we haven't actually filled, but a student/graduate post that if we have enough through these schemes we could fill to back up and allow other people to free up capacity. So we don't, other than that, we don't sort of prioritise those big schemes. But I think the team's clear on the importance of getting them delivered. There's no point putting them in the bottom of a drawer and then worrying that we haven't got a 5-year housing land supply. Everyone understands the link between their performance and what's coming out the other end. But equally, we are outcome focused. It isn't just about getting some boxes on the ground quickly. It's about far more than that.
Councillor Brown.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I was just going to ask a question about the replacement LDP and the growth and spatial options. A very quick question, because there was a consultation that ended on the 5th of August, and I just wondered when the consultation report and the results of that will be coming back, obviously for people who are interested and people who put in a response. Thank you.
Yeah, we're in the process of analysing those comments at the moment and preparing a report of consultation. So we'll look at that at the time we publish the preferred strategy, which will be later this year. There will be a members' workshop on the preferred strategy, I think in November, and that will be coming hopefully to E&D Select Committee in November as well. So that will be available at that time.
Councillor Greenland.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just really following on from the remarks that you made about town centres and vacancy rates, I think it's absolutely evident that the use of town centres is changing. It's not just for buying, it's moving much more into the leisure, hence we see the rise of bars and restaurants, etc. But there is absolutely no doubt in my mind that part of the reason for the vacancy rates in town centres is due to the high business rates. I've written on more than one occasion to the Minister pointing out that the whole system, frankly, is not fit for purpose. It makes absolutely no sense to me that town centre businesses are being charged such high rates when very profitable out-of-town large multinational stores pay virtually nothing in comparison with town centres. that really needs to be changed. It needs a home system. Now, we in Monmouthshire have always tried to prevent out-of-town superstores and supermarkets, because we recognise that draws business away from our town centres, and we've been largely successful in doing that. Although it has to be said that a similar effect is now evident from out-of-town garden centres. And when you look in Chepstow, at the Chepstow Garden Centre out of town, the amount of business that runs through that centre is huge, and it is obviously in direct competition to some of the shops in town centres, offering free parking. And I've done a little comparison myself to see how much rates places like this pay compared with town centre sites. And it is simply unjust. Town centres have a huge uphill struggle when they're competing against any out-of-town centres. And of course, in Abergavenny, what we tried to do in Abergavenny was to prevent an out-of-town supermarket, which we successfully did. Much criticism we had along the way, both in terms of taking the market out of the town, and also putting Morrison's where it is. Interestingly, actually, I've just got a piece from the Abergavenny Chronicle in front of me today, and there's a letter from somebody who had friends who are architects visiting the town recently, who'd visited about 5 years ago, and they said how vibrant the town seems. And I think Rachel actually admitted to mention Abergavenny, because I think actually it's had a reducing number of vacant units, and I'm absolutely certain that that is quite largely to do with the efforts this council has made to bring the Morrisons into town. Now, of course, the planning committee were quite severely criticised for the type of building that they put, but the architects who visited the town have now commented this about Morrisons. They have said that Morrison's building has integrated well into the town, and how its architecture both complemented the town and added to it. And that is absolutely obvious when you go into Abergavenny. The council has made great efforts in improving the street scene in Abergavenny, and we want to do similarly to the other towns as well. But we've got a small team looking at town centre regeneration, and a lot of it depends on grants. But we are working on that. But we do recognise that when you've got the business rate system as it is, we have got an uphill struggle. But rest assured that it is something that we are very keen to do, as indeed we are keen to identify unused accommodation above shops, etc., and perhaps looking at other vacant shops which can be used for accommodation into the future, bringing more people to live in towns and spend more of their leisure times in towns.
Thank you, Councillor Greenan, for that. Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Chairman. Going back to what Mark was saying about the different developers, I know in the past I've always complained the fact that we give planning permission for things and they don't get on, and they don't get on with building it, and it drags their feet and all this sort of thing. But I must give some credit to the Coed Glass development. That's been one. It's been a very difficult one to do, because it's been on levels down the bank, but they've got on with it so quickly. And when I was there the other day, when they were sort of doing a sort of opening thing, the quality of the low-cost, what are we allowed to say, low-cost housing, that now is so good that you can hardly tell those from the others. And I wanted to give credit to them, because I know they're to do with Melon, isn't it? That? But it is good to see things happening quickly, because we've seen so many of them sort of sitting there, dragging their heels for various reasons. I know the one at the Derry was because of the underground. That was a bit different. There's a real reason for that, but a lot of them seem to sit there. And I think as soon as we can get them building and getting on with the job, it's going to improve things a lot. But I want to just say thank you to those people.
Thank you, Councillor Powell. Any further questions from members? No, I think we covered a lot of ground there in terms of lessons learned, which is always really important in this process. You know, in terms of the review process is ongoing, but also the continuation of, you know, in terms of the monitoring of the LDP that's in place, particularly around land supply and brownfield sites. We touched on vacancy rates and the high street, and I think Councillor Greenland's point about business rates is absolutely spot on. It is unjust and it needs to change. We've got a couple of recommendations then. 2.1, that we scrutinise the local development plan annual monitoring report and comment accordingly. I think we've done that comment, made those comments. And 2.2 is that the Economy and Development Select Committee recommends that the Cabinet Member for Innovation, Enterprise and Leisure endorses the 5th Local Development Plan Annual Monitoring Report for submission to Welsh Government by the 31st of October 2019. Are we happy to ask him to endorse? Yeah, vote on that? Just the members of this committee? Just members of the committee? David, you're a member, that's fine. So that's unanimous. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you to officers for that. So the next item then is the Planning Annual Performance Report, scrutiny of the Annual Performance Report. And is that you, Phil? Yes. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'll just do a very quick intro and Phil will come through the detail. So as the name suggests, it's the annual performance reports that we're required to do for Welsh Government that came in about 4 or 5 years ago now. And at the same time, this committee was asking about planning performance, so it made sense to report this for scrutiny and comment, and we've carried on doing that on an annual basis, so hopefully you'll agree that still makes sense and you derive value from it. It's a bit of a challenge writing this report, and it's certainly time consuming for Phil and the team, but it is quite a worthwhile task. It forces us to review what has worked, what hasn't worked, and what we're doing well on. So really briefly, I just want to praise the team for all the hard work, which hopefully is borne out by this report. I'm really conscious of previous comments from this committee about benchmarking against the Wales average. The data we put in the report does reflect that. It is what we need to do for the Welsh Government's template, but please be reassured that we aspire to far more than that. And I think this is best reflected from the actions that we put in the report. So both from last year and those that we're proposing for this year, you'll see we've had a bit of mixed success in terms of fully achieving them. But hopefully you can see there is a very clear emphasis on outcomes and on customer service. You know, in particular, we spent an awful lot of time in this monitoring period working on a new IT system and improvements to the website, which is quite a drain on officer time. But both have been successfully concluded, which is brilliant. So yeah, I'll pass over to Phil, but just to say, you know, the team, as hopefully you're aware, is very hardworking, and I'm pleased to say a really happy team as well in terms of DM and the wider planning service, which is particularly important, but it's never measured anywhere. So well done to them all. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, so this is the 5th annual performance report, rather like the AMR, it covers the period 2018-19, so we're always looking at the previous reporting period. And it sets the planning service against nationally set performance indicators, government targets, Wales average performance and our performance last year as an authority. And it's looked at in terms of the challenges, opportunities, priorities and resources that are available to us, and that includes obviously financial issues which have been in place for some time now. In terms of the APR, it's to reflect on and celebrate good performance and identify areas for improvement, looking across Wales to identify best practice in other authorities that we can learn from, and also share good practice that we ourselves carry out with other authorities. So it's divided into sections. It's fair to say that a lot of this is more quantitative than qualitative in terms of looking at the PIs that are measured by Welsh Government, as is usual. They try and feed in things like quality through things like engagement and the quality itself section, which focuses on things like how well committee perform and in terms of looking at recommendations, contrary to officer advice, proportions of those, and in terms of our appeal performance. So that they do try and bring in qualitative measures as well as the easier ones to measure, like how quickly do we deal with planning applications, how many do we approve, etc. And enforcement is also covered, which I'll come on to in due course. So in terms of actions from last year, there were 5 actions. I won't go through absolutely all of these, but I'll cover some of them perhaps key ones. We did look to carry out a systems review of the whole revisit rather of the whole planning system, focusing particularly on the enforcement team. Bear in mind they had a significant caseload the year before last. It seemed to have gone up, and there may have been a spike from that in view of the use of the website to report it function, whereby people can report enforcement complaints online. So there was a bit of a spike. So we looked at those processes. Stemming from that, we looked at demand from customers, and there was a focus on actually improving our web pages, because we felt that the web pages weren't providing a good enough offer to our customers. So there was a lot of work done with the digital team, and we set up a sub-team to work on the web pages, including Craig and several others, so you should take some credit for this. There he is at the back. And they did a lot of good work in terms of redesigning the web pages, making them more accessible, more interesting to look at, making sure there were fewer clicks to get to important information for the customers. And that went live in about March this year. We've had some really good feedback from customers and some really positive feedback from agents as well. So that's one of the key areas of work that we've actually done. That actually chimed with Action 4, which was to improve the web pages. So there was a combination of that. In terms of the enforcement review, that was kind of put on hold to some degree, because we appointed the previous manager retired, and we appointed a new manager. Andrew sitting at the back now, so some of you will know Andrew, who's the enforcement manager. And we decided to do a very sort of root and branch review of the enforcement team, and that's progressing, and it's going very well actually, but it should be concluded by December this year, and it's actually one of our actions for the current reporting period. And we're also already seeing the fruits of that coming through in terms of improving our performance, in terms of how we actually investigate and then take positive action to reduce the time that's taking. Because that was a red indicator, as I'll come to. It was unfortunately taking us an average of 232 days to take positive enforcement action, and that was simply not good enough really, compared to the Welsh average of 166 days. So you can see that needed to improve. So we've done some work there in terms of setting more milestones and key actions for the case officers to make sure they're actually closing cases more quickly and carrying out investigations more quickly. In terms of Action 3, we also wanted to monitor the effectiveness of our own pre-application advice service and fast-track application services while rolling out the use of planning performance agreements on major planning applications. We have trialled the latter, planning performance agreement. We've done our first one at Fairfield Maybe, and that seems to have worked well. And the applicant was pleased generally with the outcome there, and the application was approved May time this year. And there was a series of milestones agreed that we would, with best endeavours, try to adhere to. So we're looking to roll out further planning performance agreements over the coming period. And it's anticipated there will be further ones of these, though we haven't had one in yet. In terms of the pre-application advice service, that's been pushed back into this current reporting period, partly because of the implementation of our iDocs application processing software, which took up a lot of resource within the team. And some of those who would have been involved in the bespoke pre-application advice review were involved in the iDocs implementation. That went live in April this year, April the previous year rather, and it's already providing savings to staff in terms of automating actions. So we're sending a lot more consultations by email rather than paper, and there's fewer clicks to actually produce reports, etc. So that's freeing up time for officers to actually carry out work of value, such as doing officer reports and visiting sites. And the last action was to pursue an agenda of collaboration in relation to heritage services with neighbouring authorities. And thanks to Amy, who's at the back there as well, she was instrumental in getting this off the ground. Following a memorandum of understanding, we're now providing a joint heritage service with Torvine that we manage. And is staffed, but paid for, an extra member of staff is paid for by Torvine Council, but we do provide that service and manage it for Torvine. And that seems to be working very well too. We've had positive feedback from our customers at Torvine. So in terms of how we did outside what I've just talked about, what we seem to be good at is we're good at dealing with major planning applications. 89% of those were determined within agreed timescales, which is well above the Welsh average, which I think is 67%. So we're good at dealing with major planning applications, and we deal with them quite quickly. We deal with them in an average of, sorry, bear with me, should have this figure to hand, and it is, sorry, it's green here, so I can't read this very well. 66 days we take on average to deal with a major planning application, which is much quicker than the Welsh average, which I can't read here, sorry, because it's very dark. I'll send you the data, but it is in the report. We determined 88% of all applications within agreed timescales, which is just above the Welsh average, and we dealt with more planning applications. We determined more this year than last year by about 3%. And we consistently deal with applications and approve around 95%, which again is pretty consistent with what we've done for the last 5 or 6 years. And of those applications which had gone through our own pre-application advice service, 98% were approved. There were only 2 which weren't approved. One was refused because they didn't actually follow advice, which we gave at pre-application stage, and the other one was withdrawn as the applicant's circumstances changed. And we deal with the largest number of applications for listed building consent in Wales of any authority, that's 79 applications, and around 89% of these were approved within agreed timescales, which again is a commendation to our heritage team who work really hard, and we do as an authority set put heritage in a very see it as a very important function for the authority to protect and enhance. Our enforcement performance did decline over 2018-19, hence the action to review that, which will conclude in December, and it'll be very much an item for our agenda next year to look at how we've done in terms of enforcement turnaround. So in terms of the performance indicators, there are 11 that are actually ranked by particular performance. We're green in 6, fair in 1, and poor in 4. So we're good, as I've generally said, in terms of major applications. Other application turnaround within agreed timescales we're good at. Member turnaround at committee is low, only 4%. Welsh average is something like 7%. So we perform well in terms of presenting recommendations to committee that committee will actually listen to and agree with. And so there's consensus and good working relationship between officers and committee members. In terms of the 4 red measures, 2 of them I've mentioned already. The enforcement measures need to be improved. Our appeal performance still was in red measure, which it was last year, at 46%. It should be around 66%. But what I'd qualify that with is we do get a very low number of appeals because we like to try and negotiate to a positive outcome. We only had 13 appeals out of over 1,100 applications determined last year. So I think it's the second lowest proportion of appeals to total number received of any authority in Wales. 4 of the appeals that were allowed were member turnarounds at committee, but they were, to be fair to members, based largely on design issues, which are subjective. It's no criticism really of members of planning committee. The numbers are low, and they are entitled to take a different view where they feel it is justified. And we do try and support them where there is an appeal or a hearing, and make sure that the arguments put forward are credible and are not costable. So I don't think it's something to be too concerned about, and we should see the appeal performance improve. In fact, Q1 of this year, we won 3 out of 4 appeals, so that's up to the 75% mark, which would be ranked green. The other measure is the 5-year land supply, which we've talked at length about with the AMR issue, and that had fallen in this reporting period to 3.9 years, and we now know that it's gone up in the current reporting period. 1920 it will have gone up. No, 1819 it will have gone up to 4 years. Sorry, it is 4 years. It has gone up to 4 years, but it's still a red measure because obviously it's below 5. So those are areas where we did well, we improved. Major applications determined. Average time taken to determine major applications in days was just 66 days. That improved dramatically from the year before. Percentage of listed building applications determined within agreed time periods increased very well. And member decisions against officer advice reduced from 7% the previous year to 4%. And actual appeal performance did improve, although we appreciate there is still room to improve in that. So the key activity, I'll just do this very quickly because there was a lot of work that was carried out last year, as you can see. Commencement of work to formally review the LDP, that was a key area of activity. Establishing the Joint Heritage Service for Monmouthshire and Torfaen councils. The council's heritage manager has achieved delegation from CADU to determine heritage applications for Grade 2 star listed buildings. We already had 2 Grade 2 listed building accreditation, but now Grade 2 star listed buildings, and this is understood to be first in the UK, Amy? Apparently. We think it is. One of the important things we did was achieve succession planning in the DMM policy teams via promotion of excellent internal candidates. So some of whom are in the room, so I won't blow the trumpets anymore, but just to say that I think it's been a good fit. People have got career development within the authority, and they've got the confidence to apply for the jobs and become successful. So we're very pleased with how some of our colleagues have come through and assumed more senior roles and are doing a really good job in terms of their management of the respective teams. Another area was developing with members, something again we talked about, a credible and innovative policy approach to address the shortfall in the 5-year housing land supply, which had slipped to 3.9 years, but has improved to 4 years, partly as a result of approval of 2 non-allocated housing proposals that were part of this approach. And lastly, we've secured planning permissions for 2 LDP strategic housing sites, Crick Road and Rockfield Farm Undy. So in terms of actions for 2019-20, we want to complete the review of the bespoke pre-app service and roll out the use of planning performance agreements where appropriate, and we're confident we can meet both of those particular aspirations. In terms of action 2, we want to continue to improve the planning services web pages to deliver relevant, accessible and legible information so that customers can find the information themselves rather than emailing or calling us, which is a waste of the service ultimately. And this will include investigating the value of a chat bot like Monty. Would be probably a role of what Monty does, to signpost users to information held online to reduce queries we get, especially the duty officer who's we have a daily duty officer who spends most of the day just talking to customers on the phone, handling inquiries. And in terms of action 3, we want to finish the enforcement review to speed up decision making and verify we have the right resources and we're providing a good service to our customers. And interestingly, because that's been commenced, and Andrew's had a big part in this, looking at the Q1 figures for this year, the figure I mentioned earlier last year, which was 232 days, average time to take positive enforcement action, over Q1 that had fallen to 80 days. So it just shows what you can do by having processes in place that actually seek to improve the quality and speed of decision making and to actually provide a better outcome for the community who are concerned about unauthorised development. And the last action is to continue the agenda of collaboration in relation to heritage services with neighbouring authorities and collaboration in other areas where possible, including the evidence base for the review of the LDP. We've already done a lot of work with neighbouring authorities, Torfaen and Blaenau Gwent, and indeed Newport and Caerphilly in respect to the evidence base for the LDP, and that may well continue going further forward. Yes, in terms of the heritage service, we're in agreement with Blaenau Gwent to provide a heritage service for that authority as well. So, and there is scope to help other authorities where their need is and where it can be resourced by agreement with those authorities. So the last thing I'd leave you with that, sometimes planning isn't very good at promoting itself, but this was a tool designed by the RTPI to help people, members, the community understand the value of what planning does over a year. So we've updated this for 2018-19, and by the allocation of land in the local development plan, the approval of planning permissions for a variety of uses, including housing and employment purposes, and the actual commencement and completions of development, and the collecting of Section 106 monies to help provide social infrastructure, as well as enforcing against unauthorised development. It's estimated that we will have contributed 121 million to the local economy and communities from our actions last year. So it's something to leave you on. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Thanks for taking us through the report. I think the infographic is really helpful at the end. It really captures and conceptualises the value of the planning function. Questions then, members? Councillor Blakeborough?
I'm a bit naughty really because I haven't got a question but more of an observation.
Go on, I'll give you a bit of latitude.
Thank you. Thank you for the report. I mean, it's clearly set out and highlights all the green, the excellent stuff you do in the Amber, and obviously you're very transparent as a team in highlighting any of the red areas that we need to be aware of. I have to say, from my experience of being on planning and over the 7 years of being here, I've seen a huge shift within the planning department, I think. It's definitely a team that takes quality very seriously. And what I've noticed is that, I mean, this for me is evidence that you do look at your indicators, you do review them, and then you do adapt and change as a result. And so that, you know, I have seen many policy changes of behaviour as well. And I do think you're a team that takes seriously what residents are saying and what your customers are saying. So it's quite business-like in that way as well. And I do see that, you know, you do provide value for money And 3 things, I think as a team you're very brave because you do make sort of unfavourable decisions sometimes, but it's the right decision. You are transparent, you do highlight areas of concern and you're open for debate, and I see that in many of the meetings that we have. And you are extremely proactive. I think you're always looking ahead. How can you improve? How can you make things better? So it's really just to acknowledge a lot of work that you've put into this report and a lot of work that you do generally as a department. And I say it's just because I've sort of seen the developments over the last, well, definitely the last 3 years, huge developments. So I just wanted to kind of make that observation. And I haven't got a lot of questions because a lot of the questions are answered in this report, really.
Thank you. Do you want to say something, Mark?
I need to say thank you very much, Councillor Bakeborough. That's really, really valuable feedback and greatly appreciated. So we'll pass that on to the team. But yeah, the 3 things you've said there are what we strive to be. So really pleased it's been recognised. Thank you.
Any other questions? Councillor Brown?
Yeah, I think the report shows that you do a lot of hard work in terms of reaching the different targets. But I was just wondering about there was a mention, obviously being on the planning committee. I'm interested in the sort of figures between those that are determined by officer delegation, those determined by delegated panel, and those determined by planning committee, and sort of the the figures in relation to those. And I'm not quite sure. I've looked through the report and I can't see. I'm interested, obviously, in the planning committee being on it. I can't see the sort of figures that you mentioned in relation to recommendations and approvals and so forth. The other question I'd got is, obviously this is looking at it from an applicant point of view and how quickly applications are processed and so forth. But obviously there is a different point of view, which is the sort of things that local residents in an area come up in response to a planning application, and they're a bit different. Does the Welsh Government just indicate indicators of how long it takes to make a decision, not necessarily whether it's an approval or not? Is that how it's measured? Because I'm a bit confused about why there's an emphasis on the number of approvals. And I do sometimes think, from other residents' point of view, it would be helpful if another officer dealt with the actual application, and the first officer dealt with the pre-application advice, and then a second officer dealt with the actual application. So it didn't look so it looked like there was a sort of a different viewpoint from different perspectives, because obviously this is very much from the applicant's perspective as opposed to concerned residents in an area nearby. And I was just wanting to know where the balance was struck here, because obviously it's a discretionary matter in terms of how planning applications are determined. Hope that wasn't too many questions at once. Thank you.
Yeah, in terms of the data, in terms of delegation, this would include officer delegated applications and the delegation panel, because effectively they're saying to the officer, you can go ahead and determine it, or they'll call it to committee. So I haven't got the data for the delegation panel. We can provide that, how many applications over the year went to the delegation panel. We can provide that separately, and I can email you the response on that. But in terms of delegation, just over 95% of applications were delegated. So whatever 95% of 1,101 applications are, the remainder went to planning committee. I think the data is here, actually, talking, I think you're, sorry. 50 applications went to planning committee, and only 2 were contrary to officer recommendation. So, so that was the 4% effectively. Which is good. It's well below the Welsh average. In terms of, sorry, the question was, yeah, the 95% is around the Welsh average of applications that are delegated. So it's not untoward. Members shouldn't feel as if we're keeping stuff from you. You shouldn't. I mean, the role of planning committee really should be to scrutinise the difficult and challenging stuff and the major stuff really, rather than getting bogged down in minor stuff. But I appreciate that some of the smaller applications can be contentious to individuals, but that's partly where the role of the panel comes in talking to individuals and making sure that they've been fairly heard, if you like. Mark will answer the second part.
Yeah, Chair, the only thing I'd add to that is members here possibly don't realise, but the panel setup is, I wouldn't say unique to Monmouthshire, but it's not done everywhere. So in other authorities, it's quite common for either to be delegated or committee. There's nothing in the middle, no kind of member oversight or those site meetings that happen. So it was something new that I learned when I came here, and I think it's a really positive process. And given that the proportion going to committee here is pretty much the same as everywhere else, we have got that added level of engagement and scrutiny with the panel process. So those meetings work well, I think. In terms of, I wasn't quite the way you worded it, but who is the customer and how we're looking at this? It's a discussion, I almost smiled when you said it, because it's a discussion we have in the office quite often. We do view community councils and residents as customers as well. In a very business-like way, the paying customer is the applicants. So we do look at it partly from that process, but we do view those other groups as customers. What we've done in the past on an all Wales basis is an extra customer survey as an applicant survey to see how happy or otherwise they are with the service. What we've looked to trial now is doing a survey of community councils to see how they feel that process is working or not. It is quite a challenge. I mean, as has been alluded to in the comments already, the challenge with planning is you tend to upset at least one party, sometimes both. If you approve it, some of the neighbours will be unhappy. If you refuse it, the applicant will be unhappy. The community council will be somewhere in the middle, depending on their view. So it is quite a challenge, but I think in terms of whether people felt they were listened to, which isn't the same as agreed with, and how they felt communication went and the process went, there's important learning there. So yeah, I think a lot of the stats focus on it more as an applicant is the customer, but our way is thinking as a service, and the engagement we're trying to do is more than that.
I'll just add something. Why they measure approvals is basically, if you think of it as a customer, if you get something refused, it's a bit of a waste, isn't it? Because it'll lead to an appeal, which is further waste. So the idea is that you measure the approval rates to see how well your pre-application advice system is working as well. Because if you're given the right advice out at the start and saying, really, there's not much point you applying for permission for this new house in the countryside, then you're giving out the right messages. So I appreciate you will get applicants who are quite bullish and will go ahead anyway, but the vast majority do listen. So it is a good indicator of how well your pre-app service is working as well, if you've got a high rate of approvals. So it takes the waste and heat out of the system as well.
Councillor Brown, you want to come back?
Just as a follow-up on that, you know, you've obviously said sort of like 95%. Does that mean that pre-application advice are approved subsequently? But what I wanted to know is, obviously, if you give somebody advice at the pre-application stage to say that their application is hopeless in terms of planning policy and everything else, do they then, because they don't then apply, presumably they're not then counted in the statistics, are they? Yeah. Yeah.
You'd have a high rate well, you'd have a lower rate of approvals if they were counted.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Roden.
Thank you, Chair. In the red zone, as it were, the two aspects. I do think you're doing a great job, by the way, so it's not all criticism. In the two aspects, the percentage enforcement cases investigated with 84 days, an average time to take positive enforcement action. Do you think about using technologies to help rather than just doing a typical physical visit to the site, such as drones or anything like that? just a thought. Thank you.
Well, we might answer this in two halves. At the moment, we don't do things like drones, but Building Controls recently investigated it in particular, dangerous buildings could be a really useful tool. Could also work in the same context for heritage assets. If there's concerns around structural stability or anything, very easy to fly up and look over the roof. There's some things we need to iron out around when you need authorization to use drones, or to what extent we can observe people's property from a little camera in the sky. So yeah, there's some bits and pieces around that we'd have to think through, especially with enforcement, but it's something we consider. I mean, the other thing that we take for granted these days is stuff like Google Earth, which when for enforcement things can become immune over a certain period of time, we now have an incredibly effective record of what was on the ground 4 years ago compared to now. So sometimes, you can have a really quick click on Google Earth and see that the extension that someone's talking about was there 4 years ago is now immune. So it shortens down what's needed. That's not the only thing we do. We will go and have a proper look on site and make sure we're talking about the same extension and not something else that's cropped up. But we do some of that softer stuff pretty effectively. But yeah, drones is on the list for future looking. I would mention at that stage there were some authorities in other parts of the country / UK that were trying to really cut down some of their efforts and just using Google Earth for applications instead of site visits. That's something that we haven't done or advocated. And as anyone that's been on a site visit knows, things even on Google Earth can look quite different to in reality. And for several years, my own house didn't appear on the photos when I was living in it. So, we need to be really mindful of that kind of stuff. There's some quite gaping potential for some ombudsman cases, I think, if that were our only tool.
Thank you. Councillor Powell.
Yes.
Sorry, Councillor Powell, could you just use your microphone?
Right.
Thank you.
I thought I pressed it. I must have pressed it twice. The things that you or whoever's doing it have Googled might necessarily take in every single thing. When we go on a site visit and there's half a dozen or more of us there, then there might be odd things that are on the periphery that would have a bearing on. And I think, although it sounds like wonderful technology, it would still be limited, I would think. But time will only tell, won't it?
I think, Chair, sorry, really briefly, what I would be keen to look at in the future is using some of that technology to present applications more effectively to committee. The quality of some of the plans or the way they look on those plans when we're trying to present them on a big screen doesn't do them justice. We're not going to be in a territory of places like Birmingham where all their big schemes have to come in on a certain amount of technology and they sit there with 3D visualizations and look at all kinds of how this proposed scheme looks if the other proposed scheme might happen. We're not in quite that territory in a more rural county, but improving some of that would be beneficial, I think. And I think some of the schemes sell themselves a bit short in the way that we have to present them, so that could help in that regard.
Any further questions? No? I think, just to echo what Councillor Breakborough said, I think the team is very business focused. I think you're really open and transparent about where there are issues where there are areas to improve, and I think Phil sort of presented that in his piece, and I think because of that business, that hard-nosed business edge that you've got as a team, you're generating an important revenue stream for the authority. The potential work of hosting heritage programs for other authorities. That's really important stuff. As well as obviously delivering a tangible function for the community in the wider county. So thank you, thank all of you for your presentation and for the report. The recommendation is to put up number 2, to note the contents of the annual performance report for submission to the Welsh Government by the 31st of October 2019 and comment accordingly. I think we've done that. Is everyone happy? Yeah. Okay, thank you all for your time and for your presentation. Thank you. Next item, as the finance guys come forward, then is the quarterly scrutiny of the Revenue and Capital Monitoring 2018-19 outturn statement. Councillor Roden? 2 minutes. Yeah, okay, 2 minutes recess then for a comfort break. Thank you. Okay then, thank you councillors for your forbearance and coming back. So we've it's a longer meeting, but it's all good scrutiny. You remember that. So we've obviously rejigged the agenda. Now we've got item number 5, which is the quarterly scrutiny of the revenue and capital monitoring, 2018-19 outturn statement. Obviously, Mark will give us just a brief synopsis. Just to be mindful, we just need to scrutinise the area of around enterprise, innovation, and leisure, and you know the other stuff has been dealt by other committees. Okay, thanks, Mark.
Is that on? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to give you a bit of context first. For the last couple of meetings, I've very much left it to the finance managers to present the aspects of the report to you. That's been a necessity in trying to cover for my role and Joy's unfortunate absence. But what it does mean is that I haven't managed to have a first-hand experience of some of the feedback that you provided from finance managers over the last 2 reports that suggest that the report's getting a little bit more sophisticated or complicated. You'd like the opportunity to actually simplify some of the messages, etc. Well, acknowledging that this is the first report for 2019-20, you might be a bit irritated to see it follows the same format. What I'm here to do is to explain that I understand some of that feedback. I'd like to understand it in a bit more detail before I make any knee-jerk reactions. And I'd also like to try to reconcile those changes across the 4 selects rather than try to provide different selects with a different quality of information. I think it's important to highlight that actually I understand your concerns. I do agree with you that actually the need for more sophisticated monitoring is there. I think there are some key reasons for that, not least of which being that the approach adopted within the council is not necessarily to via money from one service area to another and formally change the business models. It's more to arrange remedial savings to compensate for deficient situations. That means by necessity I'm actually reporting compensatory adjustments, which would be far more complicated than actually making the change and actually recording one situation. I think equally we've moved into a position which at month 2 indicates quite a large adverse variance. Members are generally more keen to understand the reasons and purposes for an adverse variance than they are a surplus variance that they'll just more commonly accept. And I think there's also an aspect in terms of explaining to members where we rely on more ad hoc in-year funding from grants and Welsh Government support that isn't necessarily included or given to members at the start of the financial year when they prepare the budgets, that there's an explanation as to why some of those figures aren't figures that they would necessarily understand. So what I have asked to do is to meet with the 4 chairs of Select at their next meeting to consider how we might actually address some of these concerns. And actually I realise it's a fairly meaty report that pulls together the 3 aspects of revenue, capital and reserves. It could be that actually that's part of the problem, that actually chunking that up in a fashion that separates those may be more digestible to members. But it clearly won't have any implication on your agenda management because overall it would still be the same quality of information. But there is some suggestion from certain quarters that 1 or 2 members would value additional training, and I'm always happy to supply that. And there's also other members that would like a more high-level understanding of the budget monitoring. I can try to comply with that, but I think what I'd remind members is that your role in looking at this report is to actually being able to hold the executive to account in their budget monitoring, and so providing you with something different than the executive has received may very well make that an increasing challenge for you. But I'm up for that challenge, and I'm quite happy to speak to the chairs to actually get a revised presentation to you. What I would like to say about the monitoring, Dave has the confidence of my to present this information, as does the other finance managers, and he will take you through the detail just picking up a conversation that you had earlier with Mr. Johnson, and I think at certain points he explained to you that actually the council was experiencing a £2.4 million deficit, and he equated that with the council's inability to secure a community asset transfer. I'd just like to highlight to you that actually the main driver for that pressure is around social care pressures, demographic changes and children's pressures, rather than necessarily a problem with a specific asset transfer. And on that level, I'll leave to Dave to take you through the details. What we have tried to do is to combine the savings and the revenue into one area of the report, and I have tried to highlight things in green for you that are of specific interest to this portfolio. But it might be strange for an accountant to acknowledge, but actually the budget is quite an artificial construct. So overall, we manage the position and the bottom line collectively. You may very well find that pressures exhibited in one select portfolio area are compensated by another. So in fairness to you, you don't often get the overall position, which is why I normally provide the overall position before getting into your detail.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Thank you, Chair. So this is the, as Mark says, the outturn statement. It went to Cabinet on the 31st July. So the outturn position within this report is based on figures only up to the end of month 2, so that which is May. Mark just mentioned that some of the narrative is highlighted in green, so that just relates to this select committee. So if I can draw your attention to section 2. These are the recommendations that were proposed to Cabinet. I won't go through them all, but obviously 2.1 is the main one there that highlights that the authority has a 2.4 million deficit at the moment. So there's obviously a lot of work to do to try and resolve that. If you look at table 3.2, this provides the revenue monitoring statement and gives the breakdown of each directorate's performance. So we'll give you, breaks down the 2.4 million overspend down to department. So you can see, as Mark mentioned, social care and health, 2.4 million overspend. But it's not just social care that's adding to this overspend. We also see children and young people overspending, enterprise overspending, and chief executives overspending. So there are pressures throughout the whole authority, not just in social care. The paragraph at the bottom of that table, number 3.3, it just highlights the main pressure areas within the departments. A lot of these are historic and come from previous reports, but the main pressures within the authority: additional learning needs, children's services, passenger transport, car parking and Mon-Life. Obviously the last 3 on that list, they all fall under the remit of this select committee. Okay. There's some paragraphs highlighted in green, 3.11 and 3.12, which is worthy of note, and that mentions the adoption of the Ealing ruling. Now, if the authority does adopt the Ealing ruling, we will receive a significant one-off VAT reimbursement, and that will almost, I don't think all, but will almost wipe out this current year deficit. Although members need to note that this would only be a 1-year windfall, and it won't help towards funding the historic budget pressures that we got going forward. Okay. Table 3.13, that just gives us a comparison of outturn positions against previous year's activity. And you can see from there that there's a significant decline in performance compared to previous years. If you can go down to section 3.1.5, this basically compares the performance, sorry, it's a wrong note. Provides a summary of the revenue budget savings progress for the current year. Of the 6.446 million savings built into the 1920 budget, 5.669 million have been achieved, which is 88%. 402,000 have been deemed unachievable and 346 delayed. There are further details on these savings within Appendix 1 of the report. Then if I can take you down to the area that just specifically deals with this select portfolio, which is section 3.2, which I believe is on page 8 of the report. So this gives us more detail on the outturn position for the services that fall under this select committee. You can see the portfolio is reporting a £340,000 net overspend. The main areas of concern within that is our tourism, leisure and culture, where we have a £260,000 overspend, and our operations department, we have a £77,000 deficit. The main areas in TLC, or in Mon Life, is our Mon Life section. We built in savings in the 1920 budget, assuming that Mon Life was going to gain charity status. So we built VAT savings, etc., and NNDR savings. Obviously, the decision now has been made not to go out. So there's a budget burden, budget pressure on the department. Within operations, car parks, our car parks income is still struggling. So we've got an overspend there, and our passenger transport unit is also struggling. Overspending, again, they can't find the savings that we built in for this financial year. Also within that area, I just mentioned there's a section on the budget savings, so you can see why some of these areas are overspending, because they've just had savings built into their budgets that they're not able to achieve. There's also a section listed Enterprise Directorate Recovery Activities. Now this just lists actions that have already been taken with the enterprise to try and mitigate the overspend. So we've actually identified £400,000 worth of revenue spend that we could passport across the capital, and that's now benefited the revenue outturn position of the directorate. You also have Francis's director's commentary. That just gives you a little bit more detail of some of the issues that the departments are seeing. So then going down to section, sorry, just let me scroll through, 3.2.3, so we're moving on to capital now. This breaks down the capital budget forecast for the year. There's also details on the additions that have been made to the capital programme in 1920. Our capital programme is currently forecasting to come in on budget, although we are estimating £1.139 million worth of slippage, which relates to the Crick Road care home project that has been delayed and will be moved into next year. Yeah,
so importantly for your benefit, there are only really two schemes that affect economy and development from a capital point of view. That's our large contribution to Capital City Region deal, and the other one is the council's commercial investment arm, and it's the commercial investment arm that is largely reflective of that £70 million total. From a financial planning point of view, we took the decision that of the delegation provided by full council for a £50 million portfolio, that would be spread over 3 years, capital programmes equally about 16.7 million. That's not likely to be the reality depending on what investment proposals comes forward, and it's unlikely to be in such a linear fashion. So what will happen is that whilst we're predicting that to outturn, largely to describe to you that there is no volatility there, if that is underspent to any extent, it simply rolls forward into the following financial year.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. So on to section 3.2.4. This just runs through the financing mechanisms that we use to fund the capital spend for the year. 3.2.5 just profiles the capital receipts activity for the year. And then on to the last section, which is reserves, section 3.2.6. So the table summarises the anticipated draw on reserves during 1920. The table presently includes the expected council fund and school deficits. So if there is no change by year end, then the council fund balance will only be 4.7 million. So this equates to 3.19% of net budgeted expenditure, which is below the appropriate guideline limits of between 4 and 6%. And if you add our school deficits onto that as well, the percentage will drop to 2.6%. So to sum up, jump in.
described that actually our position about the reserves forecasting, it reflects month 2, but actually it's quite key that actually senior officers at SLT undertake the recovery plan actions to bring that far closer to a standstill position, and that's what they're working on. So I didn't want to give you a concern that we will end the year. One of the purposes of budget monitoring is a management tool to improve activities.
Yeah, to sum up, I was going to probably say that. But yeah, so revenue, we have a major pressure to deal with. As Mark says, officers continue to look at recovery plans to try and mitigate it, pull it back. Obviously, we may benefit from the Ealing ruling, but we must be aware that that's just a one-off windfall. And if that doesn't come in, then we will have a lot of work to do. Capital, we've got no real major issues at the minute. And reserves, say if the position remains the same, then our council fund balance will drop below appropriate guidelines. But as Mark says, officers are working, looking at ways to bring that back in line. Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, David. I got a question. It's in the director's commentary under operations. It's just trying to understand the budget building process. It's clear there that Francis has said about the passenger transport unit, there was unachievable savings built into the MTFP. How are those initial, in terms of the budget building processes and savings forecast, how are they stress tested? Is there a tool, is there a mechanism, or is it just officer experience? Is there sharing of that, with you guys? You cast your eye over it and say, well, that's a bit ambitious what you're looking to save there or earmark there. How is that done?
I think there are aspects of all of the above, if I'm honest with you. I mean, there are a number of lenses put over this before it becomes presented to members as a reasonable prospect. But even in presenting to members as a reasonable prospect, there is still a degree of legwork to do to convert a potential into an actual saving. And actually sometimes, with the best will in the world, when you're making £5-6 million worth of savings a year, you can expect a degree of fallout from some of those. So just to start that process, as we're starting it this year, so Cabinet will understand the extent of savings needed to balance a budget based on a set of assumptions. Those then, SLT will actually look across their service areas, engender support from its service managers, look at what changes can be made to services to volunteer. Those will actually form part of a pro forma, which is a disciplined approach that captures information on a standardised fashion. That means that members can check from one application to another. It's designed very much to get them thinking about the consequences of it and the practicalities of it. Ourselves, future Monmouthshire colleagues, will have a look at this after the directors have had a look at it, because clearly, and the executive member, in terms of the practicalities of it, whether actually it meets with policy objectives, members' aspirations, etc., because we try not to put things to you that we know that you will not wish to take forward. And actually, I would say that despite the fact that we've got a very large variance that we've experienced at this time in previous years, the savings progress is probably on par, if not better than previous years. 88%, it's fairly good for this time of year. And actually, when we report these things, we exhibit a degree of pragmatism and prudence. It's very likely that these things will actually get better before the end of the financial year. But actually, there's an acknowledgement, certainly from more detailed work in PTU, and there is now a strategic project group looking to actually turn around the business model for PTU to make it more sustainable into the longer term, expecting them to deliver savings over and above that when actually it's the business model that's more flawed and needs more fundamental change is probably a bit unrealistic.
And I'm just going to use Chair's prerogative. I'm going to ask one more question. In terms of car parks, and obviously setting aside, the civil parking enforcement, which kicked in April, although we took a very soft approach to enforcement, and I think rightly so. In the early stages, and obviously we've just had one of the busiest periods in terms of tourism over the summer, so it may not equate until we look at the next set of figures. But in terms of that overspend, was that sort of change in facilities, or have we potentially overstretched ourselves in increasing costs? What is that overspend equating to?
It is predominantly down to just reduction in income, which we weren't able to offset in the budget build. So we've sort of built pressure on pressure through the budget setting process. So with car parks, now we have got our civil parking enforcement up and running. We're hoping it will drive people into paid spaces. But it wasn't just the Morrison's free parking that was causing the issue. We've just seen quite a large drop off in people paying to park anyway. So it is purely just a reduction in income.
Can I just put a bit of context around that? I mean, yes, you'll see people's different spending habits, people spending online, etc. That means that actually people's use of car parks to get to shops is on the decline. You heard Councillor Greenland talk about the future of the high street and it changing model. I think there's some evidence of that. Clearly the Morrison's free car park for a couple of hours is a consideration to us, but what it shouldn't do is stop us from actually considering that those assets that we now hold, whether we could use them for a better purpose or actually derive a better use of that asset. But the one thing I'd highlight to you is that, yes, whilst civil enforcement has taken place this year, none of the deficit is as a result of actually us putting a priority on actually deriving income from civil enforcement, because part of one of the tenets around parking income is that you shouldn't collect it to receive a net profit. It should only be going into the cost of administration.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Questions, Councillor Brigba?
You know what, I've got so many questions, but I'll try and keep it. We are a smaller authority, we have less money, and therefore we've got a much tighter budget. And when you look at it broadly, the big numbers, as you say, and we're not going to ask loads of questions because it's not for this committee to do so, but is around social care and children's care. That's where the big numbers are. And unfortunately, you can't plan ahead for things like that. So there needs to be a different system of money from the Welsh Government on that, I think. Meanwhile, what we're trying to do is we talked about never having to salami slice ever again, but we are continually doing that to make those kind of subtle changes. And ultimately, I'm looking at projects, and this is what scrutiny is important for, is to look at projects to ensure that we're not wasting money, and we're not wasting money through mistakes. And some of these overspends are due to investor save. So it is a difficult thing to get your head around, I think. I'm interested in terms of, I want to make sure we're not going into bankruptcy, which I don't think we are, but I'll ask the question, do you think we're creeping towards bankruptcy? And also, when we're looking at our reserves, we do keep eating into these reserves, and that's kind of like our safety net. And I'd like to ask, do you know how we compare to other authorities? Because you're saying we're starting to eat into it so that it's within an unsafe area because it's below the guidelines. But what other authorities are falling within that? So just that I can compare.
If I take your last question first, our earmark reserves are a lot lower than is normally the case across Welsh authorities. That's for a number of circumstances. Some are still dealing with, say, barrage receipts and things like that. And it's not problematic to have a lower level of reserves. it's Welsh Government are actually encouraging councils not to sit on large reserves when actually the consequences felt by the electorate in terms of increased fees and charges. So it's quite reasonable to use your reserves as part of your budget strategy. Setting yourself a target that your council fund balance will be between 4 and 6% is entirely reasonable. And actually, as Dave described, that if the deficit position stayed as it was, we would be below that level. That's why it's key for senior officers to develop the recovery plan that's talked about. Because the consequence of that is not that the council goes into bankruptcy, as you simplistically described. What that will mean is that will need to be resolved as part of your next budget settlement.
So we're probably going to fall below the 4 to 6%. Are other authorities falling below their 4 to 6%?
Well, other authorities have a similar profile of expenditure. They're all experiencing the same demographics around adult social care, people living longer, etc. And the judiciary's response to children's social care and the need to be fairly risk averse in your treatment of that client group, which makes that a more difficult prospect to accurately forecast. There are some specifics around Monmouthshire that is interesting. We are the most easterly authority that backs up against England, and there are different arrangements between our social care and English social care prospect, and definitions around ordinary residents, which introduce some pressures that authorities further west wouldn't experience. We also derive the lowest central government funding per head of each Welsh authority, but it tends to be quite relative. I mean, you are right that we are a smaller local authority, semi-rural. We have to derive less absolute savings than, say, a Cardiff or a Newport, but it's no easier to make a smaller saving on a smaller budget than it is to make a larger saving on a bigger budget. And actually, sometimes it's far easier to absorb a saving on a bigger budget. You talked briefly around salami slicing. I can understand your perspective on that, but actually I think members do an increasingly difficult job in actually being very sensitive to avoid savings that affect frontline services. And some of that does involve nuanced savings within services that you might define as being salami slicing, but it's for all the right reasons.
The other area which is for this committee is passenger transport. Again, this is something that we need a bigger input from Welsh Government. If they're committed to public transport, they need to kind of put more, to invest more money within. And I think that budget has been cut from Welsh Government anyway, which we've had to make up for. So as far as you are aware, in the future, is Welsh Government going to be putting more money into public transport, given it's one of their priorities in a strategy? And then just very quickly, you were saying earlier about the decisions members make, and I think it is true that we try and keep everything going, and perhaps we need to look at it and think we can't keep everything going. We're just, we might have to make those brave decisions. To some services, we're going to have to just say we can't provide it anymore.
It's quite difficult for you to actually make some of those brave decisions, because obviously we rely very much on annual settlements from central government. You wouldn't ordinarily wish to make big consequences to the electorate and then be surprised by extraordinary rewards and grants coming in. It would feel counterproductive. So I can understand how some of the forward thinking is perhaps a little stymied by the approach. And even this week, getting some meaningful feedback out of the local government spending review that the government has actually undertaken. I mean, encouragingly, it may very well mean that Wales are going to be receiving 2.3% increase on their last year funding. But we won't know until December and finalised in March time what that actual effect is on local authorities, because obviously the money that is delegated to Wales is further then spread around the public sector, be it health, be it local authorities, etc. So it does make planning a bit difficult for you. And also, I find that we're increasingly reliant on ad hoc grants coming in through the year. That again makes planning rather difficult for you from a point of view of sustaining services.
Expecting you to have a crystal ball here, but do you foresee that the Welsh Government is looking to give us more money for public transport, given that is one of their priorities?
I didn't answer that specifically. Certainly they've got an interest in grassroots aspect of public transport and recognise the rurality aspect in Monmouthshire, Powys, Ceredigion and such like, and will provide grant funding for it. The majority of our passenger transport aspects come from home to school transport. And that doesn't generally derive the same public funding as those other aspects. I think I described I live in Cardiff. We've got the benefit there of a fairly robust public transport system that means actually getting to school can utilise some of those things, whereas actually in Monmouthshire the local authority acts as the main provider of some of these services because there isn't a thriving private sector bus consideration. I think it may in time mean that members may be interested around catchment areas, around the bus flows, etc. That means that we may not be sending pupils from one locality in 2 or 3 different directions. There's potentially a need to reconcile some of that. But actually, catchment reviews, very emotive subject for both members and the electorate to consider. And it's very difficult to know when to instigate some of that because a child's life in school, certainly in secondary school, extends over 7 years. We wouldn't really want to actually affect their schooling or their decision making of where they go through that. So you're not going to get any quick wins from that arrangement, I wouldn't anticipate.
Councillor Roden.
Thank you, Chair. I share Councillor Breakborough's concern about the reserves. I think I asked last time we had a meeting, are any external bodies likely to make our ability to raise funds more difficult? And I guess the situation is worsened slightly, so maybe I should ask that question again. And should we actually be having more reporting on these matters as well, rather than having it at set times like this in a budget setting? Perhaps we should consider having a more regular update at this time. That's just a comment, really. Looking at the Economy and Development Select Portfolio 3.20, I noticed that Highways has used a mild winter prediction. I don't know if there's any basis for that mild winter prediction. Would it be better to actually use a moderate winter prediction? Because we don't know whether it's going to be mild, moderate or heavy. In the tourism and leisure and culture, Mon Life, 260k overspend. It states an exercise is necessary to work through the savings to check their viability. Just wonder when that would be concluded, so we could get some figures on that. And thank you very much as well for, I appreciate your efforts to improve the understanding of the report. I was actually going to suggest today that you consider providing a short seminar to help the people like myself who are financial Neanderthals to get a better grasp of what's going on so we can hold the executive to account. So if you're going to do that, I would definitely sign up for it. Okay, thank you.
I think you make a good point, Councillor Roden, and as Mark alluded to at the start of this item, you probably saw his detailed email that went out a few weeks ago, and I understand there may be some members raising concerns about understanding some of the elements. I mean, I'm an anorak. I quite enjoy this stuff, but we will discuss it in the chairs forum, and we'll try and come to some sort of a consensual solution that Mark can go away and work on. But setting that aside, I think probably one of the outcomes I would imagine of the chairs forum would be doing another sort of seminar or workshop on the budget, even not just the scrutiny process. We may have perhaps have a couple of officers in just to understand some of the budget building elements as well, which I think would be helpful. Sorry, Mark.
Yeah, I mean the reserve position comes as part of your select discussion, so it goes to 4 selects three times a year, so that's 12 times. It goes to Cabinet as well as a prelude to that. It also, you might not know, but it also goes to Audit Committee, as does the borrowing and investment aspect. So yourself and Councillor Bakeborough mentioned things around ability to borrow with our reserve levels. Interestingly, for a local authority, unlike a normal business, our borrowing isn't influenced by the degree of reserve levels. There is a specific institution called the Public Works Loan Board that actually provides loan facilities to the public sector, irrespective of those situation, and those rates don't generally change for local authorities' individual circumstances. What we do with our borrowing decisions in the budget process, we'll anticipate what the capital programme looks like for the next 4 years and attribute the financing costs to them. And alongside the other pressures and savings that are volunteered to members will be an adjustment to the Treasury budget. So you'll always be reassured that actually the capital programme and the borrowing element of it is built into the budget.
Okay. Go on, sorry, Councillor Roden.
There's the additional aspect about the winter prediction and the impact of that. It's taken the least costly at the moment in our determinations, which is no surprise. And I was just curious about the time when we'll have more information about any savings that are viable in the Monlife situation. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, you are right. There's an optimism bias in Highways predictions around the forecast that suggests a mild winter. We're finding that actually with likes of climate change, that actually it's a warmer, wet consideration all year round rather than necessarily traditional seasons. But I take your point that actually what we've done in the last couple of years is where there are any exceptions, that rather than provision in the annual budget, we've treated those as being ad hoc situations for extra financing rather than actually building them into the annual determination. Your other question was
in item 320 about Monlife.
Yeah, I mean the main saving deficiency at the moment is around the NNDR. You'll appreciate that in introducing the Ealing judgment that local authorities' VAT regimes for leisure will be similar to that of a trust. So that will be that will be fine. But obviously part of the Monlife proposal was to create a charity, and charities derive a certain NNDR discretion. We can't do anything about that from a local authority perspective. So actually Dave, myself and other officers in Monlife are actually working our way through what the new business plan looks like within the council. I understand that actually there's a report going to the 19th council around around Monlife and its immediate future and capital investment and etc. that will capture some of those aspects. But you're right, the big challenge for us between now and month 7 is to onboard the Monlife business plan within the ledger framework that we have as a council.
Okay, there's no further questions. I think we've covered our area of the outturn report quite well, I think. As I alluded to earlier on, the chairs will meet to have a look and see how we can improve a document for scrutiny for all members that they'll find useful. I'm conscious about what you said as well, Councillor Roden. I think there is a delicate balance between the operational elements and scrutiny that you know, as we as councillors need to know certain amounts that we've got to be careful not to stray into operational where, we're getting weekly, bi-weekly updates in terms of budget. But I appreciate what you're saying in terms of frequency of reporting, and there may be an element when we have that discussion that we will look at that and see if we can do something about that. But can I just thank Mark and Dave? Thank you very much, and thank you for your forbearance for being last on the agenda. So thank you very much. So the last few items then, item 8.1 is to confirm the minutes of the Economy and Development Select dated the 10th of April. Are members happy? Councillor Roden, thank you. Yep. Move that. 8.2 then, the special meeting of the Economy and Development Select on the 17th of July. I wasn't here, so I'll trust you, Councillor Roden. Oh, yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for chairing. Item 9 then, list of actions arising from the 10th of April meeting. Is there anything there you want to raise? Any issues there? Any concern? No. No. Okay, item 10 then is the forward work programme. We had Alan, Councillor Davis and Vice Chair and I had a meeting with Matt and Hazel just before we went off. She went off on leave to talk about the forward work programme, particularly for next month's meeting. Again, it's a very chunky agenda. I think I'll have a discussion, Matt and I will have a discussion with Mark about some of the supplementary planning guidance and see if we can condense them into perhaps one item. And then there's some elements there, particularly asset management strategy, may be able to be pushed back until November, the November meeting. But so I'm conscious there's a lot of workshops as well on the LDP that they're running in parallel with our regular meetings. So the workshop on the 16th, again, I think Mark Hand alluded to earlier on that he was looking to change the title of that workshop away from the preferred strategy to the National Development Framework. So we're going to focus on that. I haven't agreed that, but I'm meeting Mark now after this meeting. I'm sure that will be agreed and will be relayed to you. Are there any other issues in relation to the forward work programme you want to raise, Councillor Blakeborough?
Just wondering, for example, we've now got this pilot scheme running on sort of rural transport and dealing with loneliness and everything, and this is a new pilot. Is that something that can come to us for us to review to see if it's working and whether we want to carry it forward elsewhere, or because it seems very sort of...
I don't know. Did you want to comment on that? It's probably a bit... It's probably quite early. Yeah.
Do you think it's more strong community rather than... As long as it goes somewhere, I guess, is all I'm asking.
Yeah, I'm probably sort of in a position to comment on that, having been involved. Yeah, effectively, the projects, as has been announced today, the two projects have got up to £500,000 funding each. Yeah. We were expecting we may have had a ministerial visit, but I think timing of that isn't going to sort of permit at the moment. But we're looking at a sort of launch mid-month. We're probably looking at least sort of 6 months down the line before there's something concrete to report.
No, that's fine.
It does sit between this committee and strong communities, and perhaps that's something a sort of meeting of chairs could discuss and agree where it goes. But we'll certainly look to drip information through to members in the meantime.
Yeah. And just finally, the investment group, we've got money that we invest in businesses. You know what I'm talking about, don't you? Does that come through to us, or does that go to audit?
It's another good question that we haven't quite ironed out. I think I was under the presumption that some of those elements would come here. Obviously, commercial confidentiality would sort of prevent some open scrutiny. It wouldn't prevent a closed session potentially on if we wanted to look at particular schemes. I think we've been told by senior officers that audit committee can have a look at anything it likes. So I think there was an expectation that they would cover some of that. But it doesn't preclude us from looking at that. And I think we haven't quite ironed that out yet. But it's something that we're still in discussion about.
Just in terms of our responsibility, and given that we've just looked at our budget, and I think I said, you know, really we've got to make sure we're not wasting money, we're not making mistakes in wasting money. So I'm absolutely up for investing to save or invest to create money, as long as that's actually what's happening. And we've had a few problems in the past, shall I say, and it's just to make sure we don't fall into that trap again, really.
I'm scheduling a meeting with the Chief Officer of Resources to talk about procurement, but that issue is going to be on the agenda as well. So I'm going to try and cover the two issues, because you probably saw in the corporate plan performance framework that the procurement process has advanced, and we did say to Peter that we would give him some time to allow that work to proceed. That was obviously the early part of this year. I just want an update really in terms of where they are. Do they need a little bit more time? Is it something that we're going to deal with perhaps the back end of this year or early next year? But I'll take the issue about the investment committee scrutiny as well to that meeting. Yeah. Councillor Roden?
Yeah. I've noticed with interest the dates of the LDP meetings. I noticed that the majority of them are on a Monday evening. Unfortunately, I have other duties virtually every Monday evening as Mayor of Monmouth, and I won't be able to attend many of those. I do understand that they would be online, but it's available to councillors online. But it's a shame that these dates have been picked. Thanks.
Yeah, I think you're not alone. A number of other councillors have raised concern about the date and timing. That's another discussion I'm going to have with Mark. I think those that potentially we've got scheduled for the next couple of months will stay. But perhaps for the November-December meeting, we'll have a look. But obviously, I'm conscious that whenever we could schedule a meeting, we may not get everyone there. I mean, the 5 o'clock time was trying to accommodate those who are busy during the working day. You know, I've had particularly Councillor Howard. I'm sure he won't mind mentioning his name, but he's always said, you know, I just can't make the working day because he is at work. So, you know, particularly as a member of the planning committee as well, he brings important insights. But not just him. Those who've got jobs during the day. We're trying to find a happy balance. Let's just say that we're trying to find a happy balance. Things may change. We're going to have a discussion with Mark in terms of how the previous meetings have gone, because I haven't really caught up with him since well before the summer, since before June. So we'll take that forward. It's noted anyway, because you're not the only councillor who've raised concerns. Councillor Dovey.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, this issue about work has always been the case. When I started off as a county councillor, I ran my own business at that time, and it was always an issue. And that's why it's very difficult to get the right sort of people that you want from the council. But that wasn't what I wanted to say. About 10 minutes ago, it might have been 15 minutes ago, I probably went rather quiet. I wasn't asleep or anything, but sometimes I get a sugar sort of imbalance, and I start to feel rather strange, and sometimes break out to a sort of very hot, sweaty thing and giddy. And so that's why I was with my fingers here holding myself on the desk, as it were. Nobody would have noticed. He's always asleep anyway. I hear the cry. But as I say, if you thought I'd gone to sleep on you, I hadn't. I just thought that if I went out, you'd be in quorum, so I'd sort of stick it out. Sorry
No,
about that.
You did need to justify yourself, Councillor Devi. You didn't need to justify yourself, Councillor Devi. I'm sure.
Well, no, I know, but you know, it's straight. It's the first time I've brought up.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Good. It stabilise you. Good. Okay. No need to apologise. Okay. So item 11 is the Council Cabinet Forward Work Programme. Is there any issues there you want to raise at this stage? No, I couldn't see anything that needed addressing or calling in. So item 12 then, the date of the next meeting, Thursday the 10th of October 2019 at 10 o'clock. Obviously the scrutiny, the LDP workshop will be a week on Monday. I'm just going to meet with Mark now just to confirm that it's going to be the National Development Framework, and you'll be informed, duly informed. Thank you very much for your time and your contributions. Always greatly appreciated. Thank you very much.